Where's Theophany? What is she doing? Why has she not appeared back in the story? Because I got some questions for her. Things I'd like to know.
So maybe we do want Violet to get got with Theophany so we can get questions.
I mean, you know what? Theophany has said she'll give her all the answers she seeks. So,
True.
would it be bad for Violet? Maybe. Would it be good for us?
Violet to get some answers? Welcome back to the Bookshelf Fantasy Podcast.
I'm Madison.
I'm Lorraine, and we are two best friends who explore the world of fantasy through book shows and movies, but with that, the emphasis on books. Today we are covering Onyx Storm chapters 29 through 33, and it's all about the Isle of Dunne. We had a major step up from Prince Aaric, which I love to see, and in addition to the excitement of the combat challenges, we were also left with a whole new set of questions and curiosities about the gods and dedication and all that other stuff. So I feel like the tagline for this book should just be Onyx Storm, one step forward, two steps back, because I feel like I'm regressing in what I know at this point.
Every time. Nothing can ever be easy in this damn book.
Never. Why do we bother theorizing? I don't know. But anyways, as a quick reminder, we are a spoiler-free podcast. We have only read up to the chapters we are covering and no further. So we have no idea what's to come in the rest of the book. With that being said, we will be discussing chapters 29 through 33 specifically, but it is likely that references to the previous chapters, as well as Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, will come up. If you are not caught up, then definitely stop here and then come back when you are. Furthermore, we would like to remind everyone that this is an adult podcast where we will have adult conversations. Explicit language or triggering topics may be discussed, so please be mindful of that and adjust accordingly. Housekeeping. If you are reading along with us, then next week's episode will cover chapters 34 through 37. And second, if you are a fan of Onyx Storm, then the very best way for you to support us is to leave us a review and share it with a friend who loves the Empyrean series. This helps us find more fantasy book lovers and grow our book club community. All right, so let's get into the episode. We will start with the book report, where Addison will summarize each chapter. Next, we will convene a meeting of the assembly, where we will deep dive, analyze, and theorize each chapter. And finally, to end the episode, we will share our favorite moments from the set of chapters discussed. With that being said, Addison, please give us the book report.
Happily. Chapter 29. It takes Violet and the squad 10 days to put their plans in motion for their trip to Deverelli and beyond. The squad begins to gather on the flight field to depart, but of course, we couldn't depart without some drama first. Things between Violet and Mira are awkward to say the least, but not as awkward as the conversation between Halden and Xaden. And then, to top off the pyramid of awkward conversations, Aaric, or should I say Cam, shows up with Mulvik. Turns out Halden will no longer be representing Navarre on the mission, and in fact will not be going at all. Aaric replaces Halden and the group sets off. 8 days later, the group lands on the shores of Unnbriel. Everyone starts to set up camp, and boy, those awkward conversations just keep coming. Mira tells Violet that she went to see their estranged grandmother in Lucerys. She says a bunch of other cryptic shit, and then refuses to reveal any meaningful details. Thanks for nothing, Mira. The group settles in for the night and waits. Turns out they didn't have to wait long. They're confronted with dozens of Unnbriel soldiers. But don't worry, they brought blades. Chapter 30. Much to the Unnbriel soldiers' annoyance, Violet knows their laws and customs, and so he begrudgingly allows them to follow him to the city so they can compete in a challenge for an audience with the queen. They arrive at the capital city and are directed through the heavily fortified city to an arena where the challenge will take place. But nothing can prepare Violet for what she sees. Every single one of the temple attendants has silver hair. Not gray, not white, silver. Chapter 31. Violet wasn't dizzy, but I was. Unfortunately for Violet, there was no time to analyze. It was time to focus, as Taryn repeatedly reminded her. Dane begins translating why they are there. They, of course, select Xaden as a representative, and just when I thought things couldn't get any more interesting, it turns out our boy Aaric speaks perfect Unnbriel and forgot to mention it. The squad then engages in a game of who will sacrifice themselves for the greater good. Apparently, everyone has a fucking death wish and wants to volunteer as tribute. Xaden stomps Aaric and prepares for his challenge, but the priestess wasn't done with them. Without warning, she voluntold Dane to challenge the other twin. But wait, the priestess still wasn't done. Before Violet could react, she sliced the blade across Violet's arm. Looks like our girl gets to fight after all. Chapter 32. Violet moved to the center of the arena with Dane and Xaden and prepared to face Marlies. In a swoon-worthy, chivalrous act, both Dane and Xaden agreed to use daggers as the weapon of choice to help give Violet an edge. And the challenge begins.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Violet quickly analyzed her opponent and realized speed and agility were going to be her best options. After some close calls and a cracked rib, Violet bests Marlies and demands that she yields. Marlies refuses and uses Xaden's situation to distract Violet. Costa had Xaden pinned to his back with the blade mere inches from his throat. Thinking fast, Violet threw a dagger into Costa's shoulder, giving Xaden the advantage he needed to get the upper hand, while Violet unsheathed another dagger, effectively keeping Marlies in the same position. Suddenly, lightning struck to the left and the right of Violet, and with no other choice, Marlies yielded. As Violet is checking over Xaden's wounds, she overhears someone refer to Marlies as Your Majesty. Yup. Turns out Violet just held a blade to the throat of the Queen of Unnbriel. But hey, at least they got their audience. Marlies informs them there have been no dragons on the Isle for centuries, and that Navarre would never be willing to pay what it would cost for Unnbriel to fight for Navarre. And she would be correct because they wanted dragons. Chapter 33. Lucky for Marlies, the dragons didn't roast her on the spot. Violet, of course, refuses the deal, and the squad quickly makes their way back to camp. A worried Mira interrogates Violet about wielding, and once again, Violet has to remind her that there is no magic here. Or is there? Traeger tends to everyone's wounds, and the squad decides to rest for the night before heading to Hedotus. The squad makes it to the shores of Hedotus without incident, and are greeted by Ferris, who also happens to be a member of the Triumvirate, the ruling faction of Hedotus. He welcomes them and their dragons and even offers them rooms in his home. Ferris then introduces them to his beautiful wife Talia, or should I say Xaden's mom. And that concludes the book report.
Another cliffhanger.
Dude.
Would you look at that? Well, thank you for those summaries. And now let's convene a meeting with the Assembly for analysis. And per usual, we do have some overarching thoughts.
I have a little more for you guys this week, okay? Overall, I thought this was a very well-written section of the book. It had a really good balance of descriptive world building, action, and exciting twists. It's pretty crazy when you think about all of the creative brainpower Rebecca Yarros had to use just for this set of 5 chapters. Because you've got the entire cultural world building of Unnbriel. You've got the description of the city, the fighting, and then, the description of Hedotus, the terms of Xaden's mom. I mean, there's a lot going on. So hats off to her in particular for this set of chapters. Yeah. And then speaking of twists, not sure what blew my mind more, the info we learned about Violet's dedication to Dunne, or the fact that we meet Xaden's mom. And then I wrote myself a little note. I wrote that part in all caps, so I think it's safe to say I was more blown away by meeting his mom than Violet's dedication. That kind of blew everything out of the water for me.
See, that's funny because I was like, dedication, the gods. Well, I've been pretty heavy on my God watch, so that part in particular, I was like, yeah, because I have some thoughts about it being related to her hair and stuff.
It's because I love Xaden more than you do. That's why. And Violet,
fair enough.
Take her or leave her. No, I'm just kidding. I love Violet. But so my last overarching thought is just a quick note for you guys that have been reading along with us. Something I realized during this set of chapters is that we are now officially halfway through the book. There are 66 chapters and we just wrapped up 33. So I fully expect every episode after this to just take off. So if you didn't already have a reason to tune in next week, you do now, because I expect every set of chapters to be like, boom, boom, boom. What is the Kendrick Lamar thing? Boom, bam.
Oh, yeah.
I expect it to be fireworks.
Wouldn't understand.
I expect it to be just like fireworks every set of chapters now.
Oh, it already feels that way. It feels like things have significantly picked up as far as action goes, and then more big reveals. I can't even really call them reveals, though, because they're just details that just lead you to have even more questions. But in general, I love the action of this set of chapters as well. I found it really exciting to be able to travel with the characters to different places and expand the world. However, I feel like despite all the action, as I just was talking about, there was little to no answers, and the only thing we can keep doing is to keep reading. And I was like,
yes,
so many questions. But anyways, as you mentioned, we learned that there was formerly a dedication practice that existed, which blew my mind, and that Violet had started the process of dedication but never finished it apparently. And I was like, great, tell me what that means. But of course, we're not supposed to learn yet, so
I'm just waiting for it to all come together. I know we talked about this a little bit I guess every single episode. But I'm just like, okay, I've had enough now. And now I want you to put it all together for me. You know, like I'm ready for I don't know. I feel like we haven't got the hint of what the big conflict is going to be.
Yeah.
Like in Iron Flame, it was the Battle of Basgaeth. In Fourth Wing, it was Battle of Ressen. So it's like, what are we building up to?
Right. I guess we will find out, hopefully. And also how many of these questions are going to get answered versus left for like the next book. But I was, however, truly excited by some new evidence to add to the Andarna theory. And then, as you stated, the reveal about Xaden's mother being alive and well was pretty shocking. So...
And apparently not Venin. At least it doesn't seem like it.
Yes, yeah, that was a big
Turns out she didn't leave Xaden for power. She's just a piece of shit. I have thoughts. I mean, obviously, I'm sure in the next set of chapters, they're going to have this little heart-to-heart, and there's going to be a whole conversation about why she felt like she had to leave. And so maybe I'll find her story mildly sympathetic. But right now, I'm like, fuck Talia. You left that baby, and how dare you?
That concludes our overarching thoughts. So now let's get into our main analysis, starting with chapter 29. So we have the excerpt. This was another passage from Asher Daxon's research on Unnbriel, the Isle of Dunne. We do get another cultural piece of information. Not only does the Isle exclusively worship the goddess of war, but blood is the preferred sacrifice and cowardice is considered the ultimate sin. And my takeaway from this was that Unnbriel is clearly a very cutthroat place. I'm assuming this excerpt ties into the events of chapter 31 when the priestess cuts the participants' arms to draw blood. But I was wondering if maybe there is something a little deeper going on to that practice. Like, is it purely just a customs thing for the culture? Or is it possible there is a little bit of magic going on in its own way in association with the gods? That comment will make a little more sense as we continue because I have some other comments and theories to make about
surprise,
that later,
surprise, guys. Lorraine has more theories, especially about gods. What? I mean, that's probably what you're all here for at this point. Pretty much dominated the podcast. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I really just took it as direct foreshadowing to what is to come for the squad in the challenge ring. When the priestess cuts their arm, signifying the blood sacrifice. Right. And then, you know, the priestess cuts Dane and Violet. I feel like no one can back down because it would be seen as cowardice. So I really just took it as a bit of foreshadowing for the actual traditional customary practice that we're about to witness.
Yeah, that's the logical thing to assume. But
that is correct. That is a logical thing to assume.
Not what I'm going to assume.
That is the theme of today's episode. That's the logical thing to assume.
But yeah, anyways, to get into the main events of this chapter, apparently, another 10 days pass while the quest squad gets their plans together and they are finally ready to head out. They gather on the fight field, and in addition to Halden being there again, though not for long, the quest squad has expanded to include the Flyers, Traeger, and Marin as well. Mira is also finally back from her leave, and she gives Violet some flack about how obvious their oversized packs were, considering they're supposed to be subtle, since they're obviously lying to the scenarium about coming back after Unnbriel. Halden and Xaden inevitably start squabbling, but I thought it was hilarious that Andarna chimes in to say, "Let him kill the prince." I was like, whoa, Andarna, that's a little aggressive.
Andarna really embodies, if they upset you, we'll just kill them. You know, like, show me where to bury the body energy. And I'm here for that. You know, I really enjoyed that about her. Basically, any problem they have, she's like, let's just roast them. What are they going to say? Nothing, because they'll be roasted.
Because they'll be gone. Exactly. I also did have to laugh when Xaden tells Halden, why don't you scurry into your little basket again?
That is so demeaning. You know, when Dakaris first was like, a prince can't show up in a basket, I was like, why not? But the more I visualize it, I'm like, yeah, it's a little
embarrassing.
Yeah, it is.
Embarrassing, yeah. Taryn's assurance that Halden will not be a problem rings true when the huge blue snout of Mulvik pokes out from the fog, indicating that Aaric has arrived on scene.
As we've mentioned before, Taryn is a little gossip. He lives for the melodrama. Could Taryn have told Violet about Mulvik and Aaric and what his plan was in advance? Did he? Absolutely not. That wouldn't be any fun.
Yeah, that's true.
Why not?
Why not give anybody a heads up?
Instead, he waited. He was like, it will not be a problem soon. But like no other context. And then he's like, I told you so. And you're like, okay, but like.
You could have warned me. Yeah.
We all need to be volunteering information. I think I have a note later where I'm actually starting to get a little annoyed with the dragons specifically, because I'm like, y'all are not sharing enough information.
Hoping anything.
At all.
Well, they do carry them and fly them for like hours and hours to these places.
That's their job.
I
Okay,
guess.
they're dragons. I don't know. I'm starting to get a little annoyed with the dragons. Mostly I thought this was funny, but then the more I thought about it, I'm like,
Right.
you're not helpful at all, like ever.
Yeah. Enough of the side comments. Give me some actual information I can work with. So, despite protests from Violet, Aaric ultimately says that while he doesn't mind Haldan's presence making Xaden miserable, he does mind him condemning the continent to death by Darkwielder because he can't take a deep breath and count to 3 when he gets mad.
I'm not gonna lie, that line took me out. They really infantilize Haldan from the time that he's introduced. They're like, he's just a big child. I mean, rightfully so.
Well,
but
he
it's still
acts
really
like
funny.
one. So
I know.
What do you?
I know. I
What
mean,
do you
he's
expect?
earned
Yeah.
it. It's just funny when you see it like said. You're like, wow.
Yeah.
People really think
Right.
so little of you, and that he's the future king. That's what's crazy.
Hopefully not. Well, I don't know. Yeah.
You hope he
Anyways,
gets got. You want him to get killed, don't you? So he can't be king. That's what you were gonna say.
Yeah, and then I was like, "Ooh, is that a little aggressive of me?" Probably.
This
But
book has hardened both of us, Lorraine. It's okay. We're channeling in Dunne right now. Just roast him.
what's the worst that can happen? Aaric becomes king. That seems like a plus to me. So, but I gotta say, I do really love Aaric. We haven't had too many scenes with him, but we've always known he has a lot more courage and a better heart than his brother. He really stepped it up in this set of chapters, I think. So,
Yeah, he did. Actually, as we were reading this set of chapters, I realized that the page time I get with Aaric is like this, and I'm making a very small space between my fingers. But my love for him is like this, and I'm spreading my arms all the way out. The ratios are not balanced. I have like this really deep, profound devotion to him, and really he's done like nothing to earn it. And so I don't know why I'm like kind of obsessed with him, but I am.
he has now, though. So,
Well, true. He's getting there. And not that he's bad or anything. It's just like, why do I feel this strongly about a character who's like really not been in the series very much?
because every time he is, we're like, oh,
That's true.
that was
That's
great.
fair.
They're
Yeah.
very impactful, and he always does the right thing. So,
Yes. I love a good
yeah.
boy and a bad boy. Any boy, really.
Eddie and all, yeah. So now that the cat's out of the bag, Haldan is surprised and pissed to discover that his brother is not, in fact, on a birthday rendezvous across the kingdom, but he is actually a rider. And I loved when, after Haldan tries to protest him going on the mission, Aaric tells him, "I was sick of sitting by knowing you and Dad weren't doing shit about the Dark Wielders, and I'm not going to sit by now and watch you run our only hope into the ground."
I realized I just answered my own question earlier, but it's hard not to love Aaric when he's been on the right side of history for basically as long as he was able to make a decision about it. We, as I said just moments before, haven't talked about Aaric too much because he really hasn't been in the book. But I do have a feeling we're going to continue to grow to like him even more. And I just get the sense that all of his actions as the quest god are going to prime us for him being king of Devar someday. Everything he does has a very like regal air to it. And obviously, I know there's a long way between him now and being king. Like, he has to graduate, he has to survive. Haldan would have to die and Tauri, but I don't know. Just feels right.
With that, Haldan is officially dismissed from the quest squad, but Violet promises him she won't let anything happen to Aaric. And obviously, we're giving Haldan a lot of shit so far because his whole attitude and his actions have obviously warranted that. But I do think in this circumstance, he is genuinely concerned for his brother's safety. And that concern is part of why, obviously, he didn't want Aaric going.
I agree with that, especially when it's described, the plea in his eyes hits me straight in the chest. Haldan really gives the energy of, I can fuck with my brother, but none of you can. I can beat him up and put him down, but if any of you endanger him, I'm coming for you.
So at this point, the official squad for the mission as they depart for Unnbriel is as follows. We have Violet, Xaden, Mira, Riddick, Dane, Garrick, and Aaric for the riders. And then we have Kat, Drake, Marin, and Traeger representing the flyers. They depart, and by the 8th day of travel, they reach the southwestern coast of Deborelli and cross over the expansive ocean for their final flight to reach Unnbriel's coast. One thing they touch back on is the runes, and they realize that some runes work off the continent, but in order to test which ones, everyone was supplied with a handful of multicolored quartz discs to test. Violet notes that one of her runes prevents her from sunburning this time, but she wasn't sure if it was the amethyst disc or the same rune on one of the daggers Xaden gave her last year. This confused me a little bit, and it had me second guessing and questioning a lot of things, but personally, I'm still sticking with my theory that the runes that do end up working were either placed by Violet or maybe like activated by her. I had to kind of like start thinking all about runes again. And obviously we don't get a ton of information about them, but there's a few different things that can affect the efficacy of a rune. You have the person whose magic was used to create and temper the rune, the person who activates a rune, the material a rune is tempered into, or the shape of a rune. That's my understanding so far. Violet's thought seems to indicate she thinks it's either the amethyst quartz material or the shape, but I still don't see how those things would matter more than the magic that was used to create the rune or activate it, because we know they're going somewhere without magic. At its core, for any rune to even work at all, it has to be imbued with some kind of magic. Like that's how runes are created in the first place. And so to me, like foundationally, that's where my brain went, but I know you have a different thought about it, so I'll let you jump in.
Honestly, I probably need to go back and read Trissa's whole thing on like how runes work. So my understanding is that when you're making a rune, a person's individual magic doesn't matter. Having magic, no matter what type, only gives you ability to pluck the magic from the air. So what dictates the power of a rune is the shapes that you embed, because you can layer multiple geometric shapes that alter the meaning of the rune. That's how Liam's mom, Colonel Mari, was able to create the rune that gave all the marked ones their relics and their ability to have a second signet. And Xaden even tells Violet that can never be replicated because it was so complex. And so runes have layers, right? And so to me, the person who makes them doesn't matter so much as what shapes they're embedding and also the materials. And I probably should have prefaced this earlier, so let me just say, overall, I feel throughout the series, we really don't know a lot about runes and how they work. And of course, neither does Violet or the squad, because they were literally just reintroduced. I think one of the excerpts talks about how they were a lost art, especially after the rebellion. They basically tried to eliminate anything from Tirish culture. So I feel my working knowledge of runes is reflective of that. So if I get anything wrong or mess anything up, just know I'm just going here on very limited information, a little bit theory. I think the geometric shape of the rune impacts it the most, as well as the material the rune is tempered into. Remember, when Mira is doing her test to see if it's even possible to alter the wards, a big piece of that was the material it was tempered into. I think Violet's thoughts directly support that idea. If the shape of the rune is the same, then hypothetically it should act the same. But she wonders if the one in the quartz or the one in the metal, I'm assuming it's some kind of metal in the dagger, it's not explicitly stated, is what's making it work. So I think the material is more likely to affect how it works. Now, then there's a separate kind of branch of thought here is Violet's like, certain runes may just not work at all, like certain patterns that are woven. So that unclear, right?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I know the shapes and the material definitely play a role in what the expected outcome for a rune is supposed to be. Like if you, I don't have a great example.
2 triangles and a rectangle make heat, whatever, we just make it up because they don't know either.
Right. If that's what it is, and like you put it on wood versus metal, I think the degree or like how that fire manifests is going to change and it's going to be different. But fundamentally, none of those things work unless they're imbued with magic. And I think my point is if they're going to a place that doesn't have magic, and as we see, everybody else typically can't use their magic except for Violet. And like we have a theory about that maybe being connected to Andarna. But aside from that, it feels like to me, the source of the power that was used to activate and create the runes is going to ultimately determine whether or not they can even work at all. Like that's my sense right now. Because it's like a computer. Because like you can get different models of computers or like computers with different features, aka shapes and material for your computer. But at the end of the day, if your computer is not charged, none of that matters. It's not going to work. So that's kind of where my brain was going. But I totally agree that if Violet's thinking about it, it's totally possible that maybe it is actually about the material and it has nothing to do with the magic itself. So I guess baseline is like, we just don't know enough.
We don't know enough.
Which is really annoying.
I know. I mean, I just think to counter your example, my understanding is that Violet didn't weave those runes. And she definitely didn't weave the one in her dagger, and she didn't weave the one Mira gave her. So her magic wasn't used to make it. And honestly, the chapter is vague enough. When I read that and it said, as Mira predicted, some worked, some didn't. I figured all of the squad had certain runes that did and did not work for them. They didn't only work for Violet. So there's just too much ambiguity. Okay. Does that make sense? Because if, Riddick has one that works and so does Zayden, everyone has a different one that works and some don't. I mean, as we've kind of stated, it's ambiguous enough that you're kind of like, something's going on with runes. We'll just bookmark it for later.
Right. Okay.
I'm going to go back and read about those damn runes. We talked about this.
I did actually go and search all this stuff. That's how I came up with this, is because I actually did go back and reread about runes and what they say about them. And so, I don't know. Anyways, my general sense is, well, I guess we see different, or I don't know if anybody else has ideas about this. Like,
text us, help us.
Without spoilers. Yeah.
Please don't spoil anything.
What are your thoughts about these runes? Do you feel like it's about the magic? Do you feel like it's about the shape or the material of the rune? So we'll just keep reading.
Yeah. Guess we'll just figure it out later.
But I will say we can add this to our gem watch list. We've now been introduced to rubies, Amelian citrine, which is a type of quartz, emeralds, and now we have like these various other kinds of quartz discs. And then we actually get tourmaline, I think, later too, right?
That's in Mira's bracelet.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. So that's another gem quartz. So lots of gems.
Gem watch, baby.
Once again, the dragons and griffins struggle a bit without the added strength from magic, but they forge on because they really don't have a choice. It's basically either fly or drown for them.
Yeah, it really is like sink or swim, Something we haven't talked about at all in Onyx Storm is Darna's wings. In Iron Flame, it felt like such a huge thing that she would never be able to bear a rider, and it really has not come up directly since. I mean, we know through Iron Flame, she's training with the Elders so she can fly, and of course she has her harness and all that. But it's noted when Darna unclipped from Taryn, Violet thinks her wing beats are strong, but the difference in her left wing is far more visible without magic for strength. I thought this back during Iron Flame, but I still really think in book 4 or 5, probably 5, there's going to be this epic moment of great need where Darna is able to carry Violet as her rider. And I know. I just brought it up because it's really not something we've talked about or discussed because it just really hasn't come up. But I just have a feeling, I'm like, I'm going to say it here. So when I'm writing book 5, I can clip these two together and be like, well, that aged really well.
I also thought it was interesting that Taryn starts to recite the lore of his breed, starting from the first of his line up to Thoreau, the first black dragon to ever successfully bond back during the Great War, and then stops. We mentioned this last episode too, but Taryn never continues on and gives the full story about his lineage or breed, and I find that really odd. It's either that or Violet always cuts him off and says like, yeah, we know, but per usual, we have many questions about the Empyrean and very few answers. This did, however, tell us that the very first dragon of the Medine line, which Taryn descends from and subsequently bonded a rider, was a dragon named Thoreau, meaning he was a dragon of one of the first 6 riders in that case, right?
Those are my thoughts exactly, which means thus far, here's what we know about the first 6 and their dragons, which I'm sorry to say is really not much at all. We know there's Lyra and Aaric, both riders. And now we have one of the dragons who's been named, which is Thoreau. And as Taryn says, he was the first black dragon to ever successfully bond back during the Great War. So don't know who his rider is. Could be unnamed, could be Lyra, could be Aaric. But I've been keeping a working list of what we know about the first 6 because I want to know their signets. I mean, if not explicitly stated, heavily implied there was a lightning wielder and a shadow wielder in the first 6.
Yes.
So we know those 2 signets existed. We know there are 2 riders and 1 dragon. So I've been trying to keep a running list of information because it feels like that's going to be really important.
I know.
You would think that would be like in first 6 History 101. I don't know. It seems odd that no one ever discusses it.
Well, it's probably because something about it is something they're trying to keep hidden. I mean, remember, again, Aaric and Lyra's personal journals were kept in King Tari's personal little vault. Nobody had access to them except for them. And so I'm like, they're hiding stuff, okay? They're hiding things.
I know.
We knew that they were hiding things, but I feel like it's deeper than just... There's like another step we need to get to that I can't quite figure out yet, but it's there.
I mean, logically that tracks, but I just keep thinking about how in Kaori's office, Violet notes that there's a picture of the first 6 and their dragons in his office. So it's like, I don't know. Ugh.
I know, frustrating. But after 12 straight hours of flying, the quest squad finally reaches the port city of Sonoram, signaling they've made it to Unnbriel. Just like Deverelli, the city has tiered walls of defenses, which include crossbolts, and I, of course, wonder, are they protecting themselves from dragons, wyverns, or both, or none of the above? Violet also notes that, like Deverelli, all the vegetation has the same muted green color, and obviously you guys already know what we think about that.
And just in case you're new here, when colors are muted or faded, it gives vibes that Venom have channeled there before. Obviously, since there is still some color, it implies that it's not totally drained and devoid of magic. But if you're new to this episode, that is our general consensus. When you start talking about faded colors, we're like, oh, a Venom drained.
Right.
That's what we think.
It's unconfirmed, of course.
Of course, yeah.
They continue flying past the city and eventually land on a suitably large clearing a few miles inland from the coast. The squad begins unpacking and securing the site, with Mira noting that we're alone for now, but we won't be for long. And this foreshadows Violet's plan to intentionally have them found so they can get a meeting set between Aaric and Unnbriel's queen. I also found it notable that Violet doesn't think Andarna's kind settled here, since Unnbriel doesn't have magic. Mira also asks, what if they learn to live without magic? Which is an interesting point. That kind of seems unlikely to me.
I took this as further evidence to support our big theory from last episode, which, just a quick refresh, we think that Andarna is a source of power and or magic and or draws from the sky, that she brings the magic. She's got the magic in her. And so you can spin that as to prove that Irids are magic themselves and pull from the sky. So if either of those are true, then they could have settled anywhere and it wouldn't have negatively affected them, because if they're magic themselves, they could go to the farthest reaches of the Earth, or not the Earth. I guess I don't know if they live on planet Earth, the farthest reaches of the planet, and they would be fine because they generate their own source of magic.
In addition, it was interesting that we have another gem to look out for, as I stated earlier, black tourmaline, which Violet takes notice of in the form of a bracelet that Mira is wearing. It's also noted that the bracelet has knotwork holding the metallic beads, and that, for whatever reason, this tickles Violet's brain, but she doesn't elaborate on it. The knotwork part really reminds me of how Xaden had given Violet that book on Tirish knots to help her prepare for learning how to make runes back in Iron Flame. And I was thinking, is this indicating a possible connection between this bracelet and runes?
I like that idea a lot. I think that's a good connection. It tracks for me. Now, what it means? No idea.
No idea. Yeah, no idea.
I also thought it was notable that Violet, in the same thought, she thinks, and I swear I can smell parchment for the smallest seconds before I look away. I have no idea what this means, but it really seems like something about the bracelet triggered an associative memory for her. And I thought that was really interesting, because it's odd seeing a knotted bracelet and you're thinking parchment. And so I don't know if that's supposed to be like an allusion or callback to something she read or something her father told her in the archives. But I did note it because I'm like, that's a really weird sensory detail to include.
So the whole vibe between Mira and Violet is awkward, to say the least. Mira can tell Violet wasn't telling the whole truth about why Taryn and Sigale hadn't hunted together during the entire trip. Mira also doesn't seem super forthcoming about what she learned from their grandma Niara, which is who she went to go visit during her leave. And last but not least, Violet starts rambling about information from her father's books, which Mira knows nothing about. And she gives Violet a sour response when she says, he left the books for you alone, remember? I certainly don't need to know about bird migration or moths. During their convo, there were some interesting details. Violet believes that their grandma Niara was the one who stopped talking to Lilith and Asher because Asher married Lilith. But Mira reveals it was actually their parents who stopped talking to their grandma. And this part of the conversation indicates that Grandma Niara was Asher's mother. And we also learn that she lives in Lucerys because Mira tells Violet that she should go visit there and talk to her herself.
Yeah, and just like a secondary confirmation, we know it's Asher's mom because Violet thinks Mom and Dad almost never spoke of his family. So we know for sure that that is his mom.
At the mention of Lucerys, I can't help but recall Warwick for whatever reason, because he was from Lucerys and was significant for being one of the first 6 riders.
And I know we briefly touched on this before, but in Iron Flame, we really only focus on the ward part of the journals. It's never really mentioned or discussed. Probably all of the other relevant, important information in those journals. And so it feels like that's something we may want to know. And I think it may come back up again, because if you'll recall, Jacinia mentions at the beginning of the book that she's going through those journals. And so I'm wondering if there's going to be some more information that comes back up later. Something else I want to note from this conversation, Lilith's mom is deceased, and it is likely that Lilith was from the Deaconshire province because that is where Lilith's mother is buried. Remember, Violet is like, we went to visit a grave, and so we don't really know a lot about Asher and Lilith's past, and so just a little world building note there.
Mira also tells her that their parents stopped talking to their grandma when Violet was a toddler, and there's a quote that says, right around the age where her hair was coming in thick enough to pull into a little ponytail. This detail really piqued my interest, and I think it might be in connection to Violet's hair and how it's silver.
Yes, I thought the same thing. That is too much of a coincidence to ignore.
We really don't have much information at all about what happened to Lilith when she was pregnant and why Violet has silver hair and is, pale in general. But I get this inkling that their parents cutting contact with their grandma Niara could be related to why Violet has silver hair. I have more thoughts about this in the next chapter when Violet sees the silver-haired attendant in Unnbriel, so I'll wait until we get there. But for now, it's on our watch list.
That watch list is getting real big. She's getting thick.
So long. It's more like a watch book at this point. But Violet feels awkward and mentions that she brought Asher's books in case Mira wanted to read them. She states they mostly cover customs, but we also learn he was studying migratory patterns of terns and Eris birds, Phalaronia moths, plants such as Breeson root and Kellenweed, and Zakia berries that can kill birds who migrate to Hedotus too late and eat them when they are overripe. So all of this research clearly has a purpose. I do, in particular, find it interesting that we are getting so many examples of things that are poisonous. We talked a lot about that in the last episode and possible use cases for that, but add Poison Watch to the watch book at this point. Also, again, when and why is Asher conducting all this research? I feel like that's kind of like a key part of the puzzle right now, is for what purpose?
Well, and more importantly, why did he leave it for Violet? Like, why those specific details? And why all this information about the Isles? Because I'm kind of thinking about this in real time. There's no way Asher and Lilith could have known about the 7th breed of dragon. So he's leaving this for her for something else. Like, we know he knew a lot about the Groveland Uprising and the Midnight Massacre and the Feathertails, but I mean, never assume, right? But I'm going to say that his research has nothing to do with finding Indarna's kind. Like, that's incidental to that. So it's like, what is his purpose? Why does he want her to go and see all these things, experience and all these things? It's strange.
I'm starting to get the sense that maybe his research was more about the venom.
Maybe.
Because we keep getting excerpts about ways to kill venom or whatever, and then we have like these poisons that he's listing out and discovering. It feels like it's starting to lean more in that direction, and then maybe the 7th dragon breed is just like an entirely different thing. I don't know, but you're right. It's unclear. But see, that's why we need to know, so we know like what the purpose is. So Mira, last but not least, confirms that Grandma Niara did know that Asher studied the Isles. What does Grandma know, I guess? Mira ultimately leaves after the books being left for Violet thing is brought up, and Andarna, of course, just has to add, that was embarrassing to listen to. Could you make it any more awkward?
Thank you for that color commentary, Andarna.
Yeah.
Imagine having a teenager comment on your life choices. Ooh.
Like all the time.
Yeah. It's going to be a no for me. My kids are going to skip the teenagers, so I don't have that problem.
Oh, are they?
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah. They're going to go from cute to like successful adult. That's how it's going to go for me.
Yes, I'm sure.
Overall, I find Mira's response to this whole situation really disappointing. I think it's pretty crappy that she's punishing Violet for her father leaving Violet the research. Something, by the way, Violet knew nothing about, was completely out of Violet's control. They both have just lost their mother, and now really does not seem like the time to be pushing Violet away. I also think it's extremely shitty that Mira doesn't tell Violet what Grandma Niara told her. Absolute best case, Violet gets leave right after graduation, which seems highly unlikely. Not to mention, good chance they could die, or their grandmother, who I'm assuming is pretty old, could also die. And I just feel like with everything that's happened and all the secrets and lies, I don't think that Mira should be withholding that information. I think we're kind of past the world of, it's not my secret to tell.
Right.
It would be different if Violet had the power to explore that herself, but she doesn't. And so, I don't know, I was actually disappointed in Mira, and I'm like a big Mira fan, and I was very frustrated by this conversation.
I agree that they should be collaborating. However, I don't feel like Violet's been 100% open and honest with Mira either, though.
Well,
like,
no,
she's kind of
nobody
been
else
doing
is
her.
Xaden.
Yeah, exactly. So in general, I can understand. I feel like Mira is probably a little salty to realize that like her parents favored one sibling, and I agree that that's not Violet's fault. And so like being salty about it to Violet isn't really going to get you anywhere. And it's kind of silly that neither of them are being totally open and honest with the other. Asher did tell Violet, trust no one except for Mira. But despite that, Violet still hasn't been totally honest with her yet either. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know. It's
It's
just
all
like
weird.
Violet's even like, I brought the books for you to read. To Mira's own words, she's like, I don't give a shit about moss and flora and fauna of the Isles. And so it's just, that is such a big sister, little sister thing. Except for I'm the big sister and I'm disappointed in the big sister, but whatever. Just sisters. Ugh.
Eventually, the squad settles for bed with everyone rotating on watch, and the plan that Violet and Xaden constructed to get a meeting with Unnbriel's queen unfolds. Violet tells Taryn and the dragons, plus the griffins, to leave at sunrise because that is when Unnbriel's soldiers would attack them, and then they go to sleep. And sure enough, they are woken up at sunrise to a man stating it was a mistake to come. Your magic won't help you here, Firebringer. Xaden and Violet spring the soldier with their own daggers, and notably, Violet sees that the soldier's leather armor has been dyed the same pale green as the leaves on the trees, and an emblem of 2 crossed swords over a horseshoe is stamped across his chest plate. As Xaden responds, that's fine. We brought blades.
Why was that quite possibly the hottest thing to say? Why was that the
He's so
most
unfazed.
spicy response? Oh my God. Why did that like do it for me? I think it's like the imagined smirk in my mind with the arms crossed.
Right.
And he's like, good thing we brought blades. It's like, whew, okay.
The confidence.
The confidence. Yes.
Yes. But okay. So I keyed in on the emblem situation because it has 2 crossed swords. And immediately I was like, guess who else always wears double crossed swords? Xaden. Like, that's his thing. Like, he always has his blades crossed. I know this sounds ridiculous.
No. I'm laughing at myself because the only note I had was, wow, that was hot. And you're actually doing like some real thinking here. But no, you are absolutely right. That did not even cross my mind. He's the only character, I think, that is described that wears the double swords.
Yeah.
Which also, by the way, the double cross swords in the back, also a very hot thing.
It really adds to
It really
Xaden's
adds.
overall
It does.
hotness.
It works for me.
Okay, but also, as soon as they talked about the horseshoe, it made me think of how when they were in Delbrelli in the last set of chapters, or a couple episodes ago, they're talking about riding horses, and Xaden says, I think I rode before I walked. Horses go where you ask them for the most part. So then I was like, well, either this is like a really random coincidence or there's a specific connection that Unnbriel's emblem has 2 things that have been associated with Xaden as well. And I don't know. I cannot be convinced otherwise at this point. There has to be some connection between Xaden and Dunne or Unnbriel. I don't know. Something's going on.
No, I agree. It's a big coincidence at worst case. Like wow, that's really an interesting connection. And for those of you who did not listen to last week's episode, go back and listen because Lorraine detailed quite beautifully how there's a lot of connections between Xaden and Dunne. And that's why she's freaking out right now about this.
Yeah.
I talked about this later, but I do have to state it here. Dunne has at least 2 emblems, the cross swords and the claw, and the cross swords and the horseshoe. And based on the description, my understanding was the cavalry, aka the people that are here now, the horse riders, are the ones that have the horseshoe with the swords. And then the guards in the city, like the city guards, they have the claw with the swords. So I took a little bit the difference in emblems to delineate different, I guess, branches, quote unquote, of their army.
Oh, yeah.
But regardless, it's still evocative of Xaden's whole persona, plus all the stuff you mentioned from last episode. So I agree with you. That's what I was trying to say.
Things are getting weird. Yeah. All right. So that ends chapter 29. Moving on to chapter 30. We, of course, have the excerpt. This was from Major Roraleigh's Guide to Appeasing the Gods. And it warns that it is unwise to favor one god above another and seems better to disregard them all rather than show favoritism to one god. And it also indicates that the group of gods as a whole, are prone to jealousy, which is kind of interesting. I don't have a formal thought about how it directly connects to anything, but it is adding to the feeling that we've been discussing about how the gods are playing a larger role. I also thought it was interesting that Major Worley, who's from Navarre, I'm assuming, is suggesting that the gods are individually quite jealous, because that kind of suggests they interfere in the affair of humans and in the world in a more real way than spiritually or culturally speaking. It kind of makes you wonder what happens when a god gets pissed or when a god is jealous, So
I don't think we want to know.
simultaneously, we have been introduced to the Isle Kingdoms that have similar names to the gods, and we also know that there was once a practice of dedicating your children to the gods. And then you can't ignore the fact the dragons definitely don't really care or consider the gods in their dragon affairs. I don't know. There's lots of things to think about.
I also want to point out that there have been a few other excerpts from Major Worley throughout the series. In Chapter 11 of Fourth Wing, it talks about the importance of burning for Malik, or you will be burned by Malik.
By Malik.
I know that was an excerpt that really stuck out because I was like, dang, that was scary good writing.
Yeah.
And then back in Chapter 8 of Onyx Storm, the excerpt talks about the universal appeal of favoring Zanal because everyone wants wisdom, but everyone needs luck. And I have a feeling, as we're on high alert for God Watch, I bet there will be more excerpts from her in this book and also like throughout the rest of the series, I bet.
All right. So to get into the content of this chapter, the quest squad is confronted by a group of Unnbriel soldiers with additional groups lurking in the hills. As Andarna does, she points out that she would love to try an Unnbriel horse as a snack, which that's not the priority, Andarna.
Well, it's Andarna's top priority, so.
I know. She's hungry. She's always hungry. Always looking for a snack.
I feel like she doesn't even care about finding her family. She just wants to eat exotic foods.
Yes, yes. The Unnbriel soldiers refer to them as firebringers, and I also thought it was interesting that Violet notes every soldier in front of us, regardless of sex, stands roughly the same height with the same muscular build and closely cropped hair. I guess, like, uniformity is part of the culture, at least within Unnbriel's military. Satan then requests a meeting with Unnbriel's queen, which the Unnbriel soldier denies at first, deeming them unworthy. But once Terran growls at them, their tune changes pretty quick. I thought it was funny that when the soldier pees his pants, Violet thinks he definitely would have been a runner at parapet, which, like, same. I would be too. I would be running away.
I wouldn't have even made it to the parapet. Matter of fact, I would have went to be a scribe or a healer, or not even gone to Best Guide at all. I would have been at
Probably.
home.
No, I don't think I would have gone.
Yeah, I don't think I would have volunteered. Like, nah, I'm good, actually, thanks.
Maybe the griffins, because you
Oh,
won't
no,
die
being a
from jumping off the
flyer.
Yeah, you just get to jump in the water.
That's
and
true.
like
But then you have
so-
to fight dragons,
True.
which this is not super relevant to the episode. It's kind of fucked up that for hundreds of years, dragons have been roasting griffins when griffins have been fighting off venom, which is protecting their hatching ground. I think the dragons are kind of fucked up.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's something suspicious about them going on. We barely know anything about them, so we can't, like, we speculate on it.
Okay, sorry. This thought has
Yeah.
like been pervasive back in my mind. I could have sworn somewhere publicly Rebecca Yarrow said that we were going to learn a lot more about the Empyrean and dragons and everything, and nothing.
So far, nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah.
I'm just annoyed. Okay, continue
Same.
on. Okay, good. Glad we're both annoyed about the same thing.
Violet and Andarna interpret the soldiers' reaction to mean they've never seen dragons, and therefore Andarna's family likely wasn't on this isle. There is definitely something weird going on because Unnbriel also has crossbolts and calls them firebringers, which was similar to Deborelli's reaction, and yet the soldiers are so scared and seem to have never actually seen a dragon in real life. Do they have these defenses purely based on what they've heard? Or, like, why do they have all these weapons if they've never actually seen dragons, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I didn't even think of it that way, but I guess when you put it all together, it's even weirder when you remember the Queen of Unnbriel then tries to bargain for dragons later. So it's
Yeah,
like,
there's, like, weird discrepancies. I can't tell. I'm like, do you guys know about them? Do you not know about them? Like, I keep going back and forth, I feel like, and I'm very confused about the situation. So, in addition, to add another piece of evidence to our Andarna having a different source of magic theory, Violet cautions her to be careful with her feelings because she can't shield Andarna out. This continues to become a more prominent thing in this set of chapters, and we'll talk about it later, but Andarna's feelings and surges of power are definitely becoming much more noticeable as we progress in this journey. Ultimately, after a vulgar gesture from Dane and Xaden revealing they knew Unbrish customs and laws, the Unbrish captain grants them a meeting, though they could only bring half of their squad with them. The decision is left to Violet, and she picks Xaden for the combat challenge, Aaric as the Navarian representative, Kat as the Paromish representative, and Dane to translate Unbrish, and then herself, of course. This leaves Mira, Garrick, Riddick, Drake, Marin, and Tranger to hang back. I also noted that Violet states she spent her time learning Hedodic while Dane learned the other languages, and that feels like some light foreshadowing for their next trip to Hedodis. Before they depart, Andarna is asked to stay back, and Violet tells Mira, if we're not back by nightfall, burn the place to the ground. Once again, sounds quite aggressive.
You know, when they say shit like that, it kind of makes you realize why basically everyone in the Isles doesn't like them and doesn't like quote unquote firebringers. Because it's like, if that's the kind of energy you're bringing, yeah, I don't want you here. Leave.
Violet and the group head to Ystol, the capital of Unnbriel. The city is built in a series of terrace circles, and the structures within all have uniform pale blue roofs. And each terrace wall is also armed with crossbolts, which, unlike Deverelli's, actually swing in multiple directions. Violet thinks this place is constructed to fight dragons, whether or not they've actually been here.
I thought it was simultaneously funny, mildly annoying, and interesting when Violet tells Taryn, I don't like you being close to those bolts. And Taryn responds, I don't like your selection of mates, yet here we are. Funny because, well, you know, it's Taryn.
Yeah,
Everything he says is funny, especially when you say it in that voice. Right? Annoying because no one even mentions Xaden. Why do you got to bring him up and tear him down? Why? Leave him alone. But interesting because we talked about this in last week's episode, how Violet and Xaden give very heavy mate vibes. And here's Taryn literally calling Xaden Violet's mate. It could be that's just how dragons describe partners, but I just had to point it out because it also feels like, I don't know much about dragon dating, but like, do dragons, you know, do they kind of play the field until they lock it down with the mate? And they're like, this is my girlfriend, boyfriend, and then I get a mate. And so I don't know. As we talked about earlier, we know nothing about dragon culture, but it's possible that he really feels that they're like actual mates more than just casually seeing each other.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I love that for our theory.
Right?
That would be great if that was a little clue for our theory there, but Taryn, curmudgeon-y Taryn. They fly toward the third circle, and I found it sort of odd that Taryn basically terrorizes the people in the streets by like almost flying into them. I guess it was just like an intimidation tactic, but I haven't seen Taryn do something like that to innocent people before, and it just feels a little unnecessarily aggressive.
To be fair, these are definitely the most lethal people they've come into contact with so far. I really think he was just being threatening and menacing as possible just to be like, you can't fuck with us. Because like, the people at Deverelli ain't no thing. But these people would definitely be a challenge. And they're outnumbered. They're in a heavily fortified and strategically developed city. Everything there is to put them at a disadvantage. And so I think Taryn's just trying to make his presence bigger to let them know, like, don't fuck around. Don't find out. It's kind of how I took it.
The rest of the group lands on the wall shortly after, and Violet carefully dismounts after a warning from Taryn not to embarrass them. I thought it was cool that the walls actually have stairs and pathways built inside them that lead down to the ground level of the residential district, and Violet even notes we could learn a few things from this construction. One soldier could hold off dozens. It seems like being an isle that worships Dunne, war and war strategy seems to influence everything about the culture and, you know, the structure of society as well. So I thought that was just kind of a cool little world building detail. They are met with another group of soldiers on the street who argue amongst each other before allowing them through the gate. There are a couple notable things in this scene. First, Dane interprets the argument and notes they don't want us any closer to their primary temple. We know that they worship Dunne, and so a temple tour is probably highly respected. But I also wonder if there are things in the temple that they don't want outsiders to see, and like they're very cautious about letting outsiders near it. In addition to the soldiers that wear leather in muted green or pale blue colors, there are also soldiers wearing silver and armored chest plates that have a symbol of two crossed swords gripped in the center by a claw. the emblem of Dunne. Violet notes the emblem as being similar to Navarre's with use of a claw, suggesting a common origin. I have a deeper thought about the emblem shortly, but when I read these descriptions, I wondered if the soldiers in leather are considered the regular soldiers, while the ones in silver armor are like specifically for the temple or specifically anointed separately. That's where my brain went.
Yeah, and we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier. Once Violet makes the distinctions between the emblems and the armor, I took it to mean that it signifies their role in the military. And again, I don't know, just speculating here, putting on my Asher Sorengale, scribe outfit. Pale green leather armor with the swords and the horseshoe is for cavalry, aka soldiers who ride horses. The green leather would help them camouflage outside of the city, and they're the ones who go outside of the city and initially find Violet and Xaden in the group. The blue, honestly, wasn't totally sure about. Maybe they're like specifically temple guards. There's not really enough about them for me to know. And then the silver, I kind of like, I think what you were saying is, I assume they're like the highest ranked, most skilled soldiers. Like they're special, maybe anointed, maybe they're like the queen's personal guard, something like that to that effect is kind of how I took it.
So once they are brought inside the gate to an open plaza, Violet notes a huge temple that has a pale blue roof, and the 6 wide pillars holding the front are all gray granite, and each has been carved with a different symbol: sword, shield, fire, water, claw, and then the last one is book, and she notes all tools of warfare. These immediately made me think of Bisgayth War College and like their structure. They all are kind of reminiscent of the quadrants and the sections of the school structure, but also some of the more common signets we see are water and fire wielders, for example. So I don't know what's going on there, but symbolically, it kind of feels like a lot of Bisgayth's structure and ideology seems pretty aligned with what we see from the culture of Unnbriel in a way.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. All tools of warfare. Scribes, books. Yeah.
But wait, it gets better. Beside the final pillar with the book on it is a sparkling gray effigy sculpted in Dunne's likeness. There's a quote that says, "She holds a sword pointed in our direction in her left hand and a shield protecting the right edge of her temple in the other. Her long hair is braided down one side of her torso, and she's dressed in long, belted robes with an armored chest plate."
Guys, buckle up. Lorraine had an idea.
Okay, I feel like something weird is going on here. Well, I always think something weird is happening, but I had another weird, tingly, spidey sense because this description is uncannily similar to both Theophany and Queen Mariah. In general, I've been hypervigilant of similarities and descriptions between different characters because I feel like they are intentional. Theophany is described as having a long braid, then she has silver hair, and then when Violet meets her in chapter 10, she's wearing long purple robes and she has a belt with a knife sheathed at her hip. And then Queen Mariah in chapter 8 is described as the silver of her intricate armored breastplate flashes in the morning light as she walks forward. She wears a pair of scarlet breeches with the short sword sheathed at her hip.
Okay, so I'm not gonna lie, that's a good connection because it went right over my head. Just right
it's
on
similar,
over.
right? It sounds
It is very similar.
It's weird.
Especially to Theophany. And
Right.
I know we both had thoughts about this later with the forehead tat, but
she feels uniquely connected to Dunne or like the Isle of Dunne in some way, and I don't know exactly why. And yeah, we'll talk about it more later when we get there. But with all of this, there was a little part of me that wonders if the nobles of Navarre and Paromial actually have deeper connections to the gods and goddesses individually as provinces, or if they have ties connecting them to the different Isle kingdoms. I know we learn in chapter 33 that Paromial also had a dedication practice at one point in time. And then when, you're looking at different excerpts from the gods, the one from chapter 8 comes to mind in this case. And it said, while many preach loyalty to Hedian above all others, especially in Chaldean province, I find that favoring Zonal has universal appeal. Everyone wants wisdom, but needs luck. And that was from Major Rorley's Guide to Appeasing the Gods. As Addison pointed out and reminded me of way back when, King Tari lives in Chaldean. And so there's another example of a specific province seeming to favor one god or aligning with a god specifically. So it's weird. To end the chapter, I quite literally gasped when it's noted that blue-robed attendants with silver hair stand on the temple steps. I got super excited because I literally thought, yes, this is when we're finally going to get answers about Violet's silver hair. And instead, it's just like this little teaser
baby.
that barely sates your curiosity. Ugh,
You got
man.
You
I
thought
did
you were
get
going to
got.
find something out. Oh, I knew immediately. I was like, ain't no way. That's a little breadcrumb for you to chew on and dwell on and keep you up at night.
I hate the breadcrumb. I want the
Well-
loaf. I don't want a breadcrumb.
Loaf. I mean, I'm not going to lie. At this point, I did sort of get excited, but two things held me back. One, their hair was entirely silver, which is different from Violet's. Of course, she does see the little girl, but I was like, maybe it grows into silver. Maybe it's something in the food. Maybe it's something with the Isle. And number two, the most obvious one is ain't nothing in this book can never just be easy, can never be handed to you. So never.
But yeah, okay. That ends chapter 30. Moving right along to chapter 31. The excerpt. This was actually a pretty intriguing excerpt, personally speaking. So it is from Public Notice 200.417 and was described by Rachel Lightstone, which, by the way, that's kind of a weird name.
It is weird.
That really threw me for a loop when they pronounced it Rachel. And I was like, what?
Because I just read it like Rachel or Rachel.
Right.
And then I saw your pronunciation. I was like, she clearly messed that up. There's no way. And then I went back and checked it. And I'm like, what? Why?
It's Rachel. Yeah.
I don't like it.
That's weird.
No.
But anyways, it states, guardians are no longer permitted to dedicate children in service to their favored deity, and that the decision to serve the gods should be left up to the individual after the person has reached the, quote, age of majority and of one's free will. First of all, in this moment, I had an epiphany. I think the number of the public notice is actually meant to denote the date of these public notices. I don't know why it took me so long to think about this and why it never occurred to me before. But in this case, it could possibly mean that 200.417 is 200 AU of like April 17th or, something similar to that. If that's true, this would mean that this public notice was created 6 years before Navarre was thought to have cut contact with the Isle Kingdoms for siding with Poromiel during whatever historical event occurred in 206 AU. We still don't know what prompted this in the first place, but we have speculated that perhaps this was like the first Croveland uprising, since we learned that there's a second Croveland uprising, and that by nature implies that there was a first uprising. But this implies to me that maybe the dedication practices to the gods or something was perhaps part of why Navarre cut contact with the Isles.
Okay, so you totally blew my mind. I don't know why, but this felt like so important to figure out. So I went back and I searched Fourth Wing and Iron Flame for any and all public notices. Nothing in Fourth Wing, but in Iron Flame, literally in chapter 1, the excerpt is Public Notice 628.85. The excerpt says, in this, the 628th year of our unification, it is hereby recorded that Auracia has been burned, it goes on. But Public Notice 628 and the 628th year of our unification, that seems to directly support your idea. A further piece of evidence, in Chapter 24 of Onyx Storm, Violet references Public Notice 433.323, which, and I quote, acknowledges a failed border attempt by Croveland forces near the outpost of Athbeen on December 11th, 433 AU. With that evidence, I feel very, very comfortable in saying the first number definitely corresponds to the year. Now, the second number, unclear. That could be month and day. It could be how many notices have been in that year. Like maybe
that's true too.
There have been 85 public notices, and that's just how they keep track of which notice it is. But for sure, the year thing, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know why it never occurred to me beforehand.
Yeah. But I feel like that's important because any public notices we get, it now helps like develop a timeline. It helps us correspond those events. And then we can make leaps like, is it possible a limiting dedication was why they cut contact with Navarre? Or was it the opposite? Was it because they cut contact with the Isles, they no longer could engage in the practice of dedication? Either or. I don't know.
Anyways.
I got really excited about that. I was like, oh my God. I was like,
when I realized that, I was like, wow. Aside from that, I obviously have to ask, what does it mean to dedicate children in service to the gods? Is this sacrificial? Or is it assigning them a job to like work in the temples or something? I feel pretty strongly that there is some connection between having silver hair and being dedicated to the gods. And then also, what made them decide to stop this practice and leave it up to individuals? To get into the content of this chapter, Violet is stunned stupid, as are we, as she locks in on one of several children that had come running out. The girl she sees is brunette with a silver-tipped braid, and Violet thinks, never in my 21 years have I seen anyone with hair like mine. Does hers always end in silver no matter how short she cuts it? Do her joints fail her? Do her bones break? All of Violet's thoughts definitely make you question whether her situation actually is one of genetics or if it's something else. I still really think it has to do with the dedication and the gods, and I have more thoughts about this when Violet speaks with the priestess later in the chapter. But every time Violet questions something, you inevitably have to be like, wait, do I need to start questioning things too? So
totally fair. Well, and Violet's questioning thoughts here make sense. She's never seen anyone like her, so it's natural to wonder if the hair correlates with the issues with the bones and joints. However, given that many other people here have silver hair, even if it's a little bit different than Violet's, I think the issues Violet has with her joints and bones are separate from her silver hair. I think the silver hair, kind of similar to what you're saying, is the silver hair is more dedication related than it is to her physical condition. But I absolutely do think there is a connection to their silver hair and her silver hair. There is some commonality, just maybe not the physical stuff.
The Unnbriel cavalry captain shouts up at two people. One is a middle-aged man wearing the silver armor uniform, who we learn is the commander of the guard, while the other is an older woman wearing the same long blue robes of the temple attendants and also wears a sword sheathed at her hip. And I was like, description of theophany.
I know where you're going with that.
Attendant, priestess lady. I don't know. Yeah. Anyways, Dane translates the request to comply with Unnbriel customs to meet with the queen, and then the commander responds to provide their strongest warriors to be tested as 3 Unnbriel soldiers step out, and their names are Costa, Marlise, and Palta. I thought it was interesting that Violet notes how the wind is gusting and storm clouds are forming overhead as all this is happening. I have a more formal thought about this later, but just remember that detail. When they first arrived in Icestol in chapter 30, it says a storm rolls in from the west. But I find the timing of it to be really suspicious. When you think about the storm, the lightning, and Indarna, the description of Indarna later, the combination of it all doesn't feel like a coincidence. I also feel like the storm is extremely reminiscent of Lilith and her power as a storm wielder. Violet has stated that Lilith favored Dunne, and so maybe having a storm-related signet, which also involves like both thunder and lightning, is possibly related to Dunne in some way.
Not only is it reminiscent of Lilith, but it's also reminiscent of an excerpt that is about war and battle. It made me think of the excerpt back from chapter 10. Weather is the one great equalizer in battle, equally detrimental or favorable to both sides given the conditions. Without wielders swaying that element to our advantage, we are at its mercy. When we start talking about the goddess of war and battle and how weather can be an equalizer, it sort of feels like foreshadowing for what is about to happen.
Ooh, yeah, that was a good call out with that excerpt. Dane translates the commander's question, asking if Xaden was their champion or their leader. But then Aaric steps in to clarify he had actually asked if Xaden is our champion or our prince, thus revealing he speaks perfect Unnbriel.
Gee, that would have been helpful. I'm sorry, I did not find his whole "we never asked" to be an acceptable response.
No, absolutely not. That's really annoying that you never told anybody that you speak, because it would have been helpful to know.
Yes, because it's a waste
for
of
mission
resources.
purposes.
Yes, because Dane could have been focusing on something else instead of wasting his time. But I guess I don't know if maybe he hadn't decided he was going to go yet, so there's some question timeline of that. But regardless,
would have been nice
to know. Mm-hmm.
But I will say, it does sort of feed into the idea that maybe the nobles of Navarre do have some secret ties to the Isles. I mean, as a separate thought, it would also make sense that royalty speaks other languages for like political purposes. But, you know, obviously he speaks Unnbriel specifically. And I guess what was the need? Because we're supposed to, again, be under the impression that they haven't been in contact. But A, we learned that was a lie. B, what is a current prince under like the current ruling king doing learning languages of isles you supposedly don't communicate with? So I don't know, it's weird. But also it makes you ask, are there other languages that Aaric knows?
I feel like this is one of those, on the one hand this, but on the other hand this. It's kind of weird and feels like an oddly specific language to spend time learning, considering the population of people that speak it is relatively small and they've cut ties with them. Kind of makes you wonder. But then on the other hand, he is in line to the throne of Devar, so maybe it's all part of a royal upbringing. So I'm just curious to see what else Aaric knows. That's what I want to know.
Same. He definitely knows a lot more than he reveals.
Oh.
So, or lets on. Or like he always reveals something at a really like opportune moment and you're like,
yes. It's just like,
side-eyeing.
okay.
Aaric announces that he'll be fighting instead of Xaden, but Violet and Xaden protest. And notably, Xaden tells him, "You are not your father nor your brother," which is precisely why you will not fight. We need you to live. Your kingdom needs you to live. And I was like, that is so true. As the most reasonable and courageous Tari, Aaric really does represent a better future. So if he battles and dies, that leaves Halden as the sole heir to the Navarian throne, which seems disastrous.
Disastrous. I mean, look what he did in Devarelli. I also thought it was interesting that Xaden said, your kingdom needs you to live. Xaden is technically part of the kingdom of Navarre. It makes me call back to his conversation with Cortland, where he said his loyalty is first and foremost to Violet, then Tyrrendor, then Navarre in the moments it's worthy. But I did think that was notable. Yeah. He said, your kingdom, not our kingdom needs you. Your kingdom.
Yeah. No, you're so right. Xaden like probably low-key hates Navarre, honestly.
Oh my God. I mean, yeah.
I would
wouldn't
too,
you? I was going to say,
yeah.
Can you blame him? I mean, honestly.
Yeah. I also thought it was interesting that Terran steps in to tell Violet, do not consider the Dark One. Navarre needs the soldiers from this alliance to defend the borders, freeing the riders to go on the offensive. I'll admit, I was a little confused by that line. Does Terran want Aaric to fight because Aaric is the Navarian representative and therefore has the authority to ask for an alliance between Navarre and Unnbriel?
So what he means is, don't worry about Xaden's fate, aka the Dark One. They need to win this face-off so they can win an audience with the queen so they can negotiate. Remember, they're here for two reasons, not just to find Indarna's kind, but also more importantly, probably, is to negotiate for help from their military. If they're able to forge an alliance, then based on what Terran is saying, the plan would be for Unbrish soldiers to guard the border outposts, and then the riders could then fly beyond the wards and go on the offensive and attack the Venin first. They can't do that right now because they're so grossly outnumbered, and they have to focus all of their energy, defenses, and resources just protecting the borders from the Venin. So Tyrn wants Violet to just let the challenge happen because it serves the purpose of protecting the borders of Navarre. That's what he means.
Oh, okay. I guess I was like to the Aaric point. Aaric is the one who needs to kind of challenge, right? Because in their customs, Aaric is the Navarian representative and could actually earn this meeting if he fought.
Well, so obviously we're not privy to what Violet has read about Umbrish customs. It doesn't seem like Violet knew that the winner of the challenge is the one who gets the audience with the queen.
Oh,
Marlise says that later. She's like, whoever wins gets it. Because had we known that, then we would have been like, yes, Aaric needs to be involved in the challenge. But in reality, it kind of doesn't matter because Aaric is basically, I mean, number one, he's standing right there, right? So it's not like he can't hear what's going on. And number two, he sort of is giving Violet kind of blanket authority to negotiate on behalf of Navarre because they're aligned. Because Violet even thinks, hope Aaric doesn't get mad that I'm about to promise whatever's in the royal coffers. So there's a little bit of like gray area on distinguishing like who actually has power to negotiate. But that's what Terran means. Okay. Yeah. Violet's basically queen of Navarre right now.
I know. She really is. She has like full control of the mission. Now she's speaking on behalf of Navarre. Yeah.
For someone who
she's
has
climbing the ranks.
Dude, for someone who has no interest in royalty or ruling of any kind, she sure does a lot of it.
Ultimately, Xaden argues that if anything happens to him, Bodhi can step in and lead Tyrrendor, and also reminds him this isn't about honor. Consider it your revenge. Remember what I did to your brother. And I was like, ooh, dang.
Forgot about that.
It's not a pleasant reminder, but it did work. So Xaden is declared their fighter, and the Umbrish choose Costa as his opponent, and this is where things once again get very interesting. The blue-robed priestess slashes Costa's arm to draw blood, which spatters the dark stones of the plaza. Violet immediately notes that the blood drawing was never noted in her father's books, and she's suspicious of how those stones became the shade they are. I already posed the question earlier of whether this is purely customary or if there is possibly some kind of magical component to it. But I was, wondering why would her father not include this in his research of Unnbriel, because it seems kind of important to know.
I mean, just based on the excerpt from chapter 29 about how blood is the preferred sacrifice, I took it as just part of a ritual, sort of like burning for Malik. To answer your second question, my guess would simply be that he never witnessed this part of their customs. Asher is not the type to leave things out of research, and I feel like if he knew about it, he would have mentioned it. And so it's possible he just never witnessed any kind of challenge like this.
In addition, the priestess has the tattoo of Dunne's emblem inked into her forehead, and she tells Xaden the goddess of war demands her payment before you may prove your worth. Obviously, tattoo on forehead, theophany. And then the fact that Violet wonders how long it would take for a tattoo like that to fade to an unrecognizable point. Yeah, that's not a coincidence.
Not a coincidence.
Cannot be.
And then not only that, but once again, Violet has a thought that gets cut off. She thinks, how long would it take for such a tattoo to fade to the point it's unrecognizable? My stomach lurches into my throat. There's no way. Gets cut off. She has to be thinking about theophany. Who else have we met that has a damn tattoo on their forehead? I mean,
no one.
That's goddamn right. All of that, plus your talk about the belted and the robes and the sword. I'm like,
you're right. Long braid. Not silver, but just long braid.
Where's Theophany? What is she doing? Why has she not appeared back in the story? Because I got some questions for her. Things I'd like to know.
Same. So maybe we do want Violet to get got with Theophany so we can get questions.
I mean, you know what? Theophany has said she'll give her all the answers she seeks. So,
True.
Would it be bad for Violet? Maybe. Would it be good for us?
Violet to get some answers?
I am sort of getting to the point where I'm getting a little desperate. Okay.
Same though. Same. I do not actually want Violet to get got, but
maybe like a little. Maybe like a little.
But yeah. Anyways, okay. There are way too many parallels between how Theophany is described in the details that we get about the priestess, the children with the silver hair, the statue of Dunne. So here are my thoughts. I was thinking, was Theophany like one of the original children that was dedicated to Dunne way back when? Was she like the first one or something like that who was like ever dedicated? Because she's clearly been alive for a really long time. We said this in a previous episode, but Theophany in Greek means God's appearance, but also has other biblical connections in relation to, the manifestation of a deity in visible form, or it also means when a god appears to people in visions or dreams. I feel like Theophany's connections to all of this are obviously undeniable, and I don't know how Benniness links to this, but based off of like the little bit of information that we get about dedication and what you observe about the attendants and the children and all that, it feels to me like there may be some parallels between the process of dedication and then also like turning Bennin. I can't definitively say exactly what that is, but there's like a little spidey sense that's like, are these things more similar than we think? I was also wondering, is Unnbriel the only place that does this, or is dedication related to other gods and isles as well?
My gut tells me, based on the wording of the excerpt that talks about dedication, any isle that has a specific worship focus of a god or goddess participated in the practice.
Ooh, okay. Anyways, Xaden consents to the payment, and the priestess slashes his arm as well, and then Violet hates everything about this because Xaden doesn't have an edge without his intrinsic signet against Costa, and it's also once again noted that thunder sounds in the distance. The priestess notices how agitated and uneasy Violet is with the whole situation, and when she comments you don't agree with Dunne's ways, Violet notes she has dilated pupils and wonders only Dunne herself know what they're ingesting beyond those pillars. So the dilated pupils thing and the fact that she's a priestess, for some reason, immediately made me think about divination and prophecy. And actually, last episode, I have been kind of talking about Freya, the Norse goddess of war, love, sex, etc., and how the goddess of Dunne seems like symbolically similar to her. Well, another thing Freya is known for is using a staff to predict the future and partake in prophecy. And some of the venom that we've seen do have a staff. I'm just saying.
Oh, yeah, like the sages and or mavens, yeah.
As if things couldn't get any weirder, this priestess is crazy, and she decides Xaden wouldn't be the only one fighting. With a cryptic comment about revealing character, the priestess then grabs Dane and slices his arm as well.
No, not Dane!
Aaric then also tries to jump in, which apparently the priestess likes, because she's like, see, character. But then she tells him,
blood.
You are the prince of your people, honorable yet foolish to think you could survive our finest. Do you not know what would happen to those pretty green eyes should you step foot on this battlefield? Even if you accepted your death, Dunne has not chosen you to prove your skill this day. I kind of feel like a crazy person for saying this, but I truly believe that there is something with the Tari line and their like green eyes always being mentioned. And also like, what does she mean? What would happen to those green eyes?
I totally agree. That was a really weird Omna thing to say. Like, what are they going to do? Cut out his eyes? You know, like, what?
Yikes.
What?
She's the weird. She's a little cray.
How are we supposed to take that? I mean, honestly.
Dane steps into the battle area, and then the priestess asks Violet, did you choose this path yourself? And when Violet ultimately answers, I chose my life, she responds, then it is good we did not complete your dedication. Do you not yearn for the temple? Usually the touch creates such longing that you can't help but return. Or perhaps you now favor another god. And then she glances up at Taryn. And I was like, holy shit, Violet was partially dedicated?
Oh, yeah, baby. The $1 million question now is, what the fuck? We need to know the who, what, where, when, why, how. Tell me everything. Why wasn't it completed? When was it started? Who took her to be dedicated? Why doesn't she remember? Is this why her hair is silver? I mean,
so many questions.
So many questions.
The priestess follows that with, I still see us among your potential paths. Should you decide to take it, Dunne will accept you. It is not too late to choose her. I have many thoughts about this. So this is the point where I really started wondering if dedication somehow does actually bestow some sort of gift or magic to people in its own way. There's something about the wording of like the touch creates longing and how you keep wanting to come back to the, I guess, the temple or the god in this case, that just makes it sound like you will feel this undeniable pull to the gods once you are dedicated. And if this turns out to be true, then that actually could present like a third option for how to access power or magic, which I cannot even, begin to comprehend at this point. I just...
Nope. The brain is full. We need some answers so we can clear some space.
Also, the wording of how Violet can choose to join their ranks and follow Dunne is interesting, especially when we see that the priestess, in a way, refers to the dragons as being gods, which I'm assuming means like sources of powers. And she sets up this dynamic of having to choose who she honors or like follows.
Oh, man, that was a lot to process. I'm just like, now my brain is like, I guess
full. Is your brain full?
My brain is full. Like stuff is like falling out. I'm going to forget my own kids' names pretty soon. That capacity. I, like everyone else, I'm sure at this point, would like some direct clarification on how one chooses their path and how you choose Dunne and what that would look like for Violet. I think that really stood out to me when the priestess says, I still see us in your future paths. I would also maybe she could provide some direct clarification on what other paths she sees for Violet. Some specificity details would be nice.
In your past. But like prophecy, divination, like seeing outcomes, seeing paths.
Well, that's true. I mean, then Violet does talk about how they're smoking something good behind the pillars. And so maybe it's like some, not to make a Dune reference, like Dune by Frank Herbert, but like maybe there's some Dune shit going on here with whatever drug they're taking. It helps open their mind. I don't know, man.
What if it's not a drug, though? Maybe, what if they're also pulling power in some kind of way? Or like, maybe it's a poison, or maybe it's one of all these freaking poisons that we're learning about.
That's basically like in Dune by Frank Herbert. They do the right, and then they can see I'm getting all sci-fi. If you've read Dune, you know what I'm talking about. But I don't know. Culturally, there's something to that, right? There's some mystique. There's some knowledge she's accessing. Maybe she just has a really good intuition.
I doubt that. It ain't no intuition. No freaking way. But okay, I feel like the dedication, the way that it's described, seems to parallel Venonism in a way as well. And I'm working with a couple assumptions here. So, I mean, this is all speculation and it stands to be like confirmed, obviously. But so there seems to be like physical changes that take place. Assuming that dedication is the reason that there is silver hair, then becoming Venom also presents its own sets of physical changes that we see. And then this discussion of like longing for something, for the dedicated, it seems to be this desire for a god or goddess or like the temple, I guess. While for the Venom, it's longing and desire for power. So there's some weird components going on that just kind of seem similar to me, but I'm still working on that theory and collecting evidence. Anyways, to end this chapter, the priestess is still a crazy lady. And after Violet states, I choose him, she slices Violet's forearm as well, thus entering her into the fight. But I do find the ambiguity of Violet's words to be kind of interesting. She doesn't specify Xaden or Taryn, and instead she thinks whether she's talking about Xaden or Taryn, my answer is the same.
Which now begs the absolute worst question imaginable. If Violet had to choose Taryn or Xaden, who would she choose? We know Xaden picked Violet over Sigale, but would Violet do the same? If push came to shove, if she really had to, what would she do?
Oh, that's a tough question. Wow.
I feel like on face value, you're like, oh, Xaden, obviously. But the more you think about it and Violet's character and how she always does what's right and how she's sort of the only hope for Navarre, it really makes you start to wonder.
It does, yeah.
It's not as black and white as you think. But
Yeah.
weirdly enough, for Xaden, obviously it's easy to say because he already made the choice. But if you would have asked me that, I would have been like, he's going to choose Violet, no question. It seems very cut and dry for him, but not as much for Violet, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I agree with that. All right, so that ends chapter 31. Moving on to chapter 32, the excerpt. This was another passage from Asher Daxon's research on Unnbriel, the Isle of Dunne. In this excerpt, Asher discusses how it requires much more dye to color a garment in Unnbriel than on the continent due to the wan coloring and vegetation. So wan is an adjective that means weak or pale and giving the impression of illness or exhaustion. Yes, I did look that up because I needed to confirm for myself what it meant. I kind of had an idea, but I didn't know explicitly like what the words for it were. So Violet has always been described as pale and lacking color. In the beginning of Fourth Wing, Lilith tells Violet pale skin, pale eyes, pale hair. And then she also says it's like that beaver stole all your coloring along with your strength, referring to her sickness while she was pregnant with Violet. So this is where I had a thought. What if the reason Lilith was sick was because they started this dedication process for Violet before she was born? And then through whatever process it involves, it resulted in Violet's paleness and her silver hair because in chapter 33, Mira tells Violet her hair grew in that way. So, I mean, it's totally possible, I guess, like, whatever happened with Violet's silver hair situation probably happened while she was still in the womb.
Possibly. I mean, unfortunately, they don't tell us anything about what the dedication process actually looks like.
Right,
so we don't know
I'm purely speculating
what they have to
based
do.
off
Yeah. But
random stuff. But
you know what? Sure. Yeah. Canon. You know what? At this rate, absolutely.
it also made me wonder if maybe the weak color of the vegetation in the Isles is somehow connected with the process of dedication to the gods.
That's interesting. Because
what if something that they're doing is resulting
pulling
in
the color.
AKA, could they be channeling something from the ground?
You know what? Okay, not everyone and everything is Venom, okay?
At this point, who's to say? I mean, what if this dedication thing is all just like kind of a code for turning Venom, but a lid's been capped on it in the Isles, but it's spread outside of them before they could do anything about it. And like, that's where the Venom came from.
Girl, what? Do you need a snack break?
No. Okay, anyways, yeah, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Getting a little too conspiratorial here.
I do agree that it does seem like there's the connection to the weaker color and then this like the silvering of the hair. I like your thoughts overall on the excerpt, except for that last bit, girl. I don't know what you're going for there, okay? Because really, I gotta be honest, I had nothing for this excerpt. I feel like the meaning is just at the very edges of my reach and I just couldn't connect the dots. But there is something to how there's this excerpt noting about color, and then everywhere Violet goes, she notices, oh, it's a pale green. And then when they get to Hedotus later, it's even paler green. There's something about colors and how they're faded or more bright or vibrant, and then the gems are vibrant. There's something to that. I just don't know what it is. But apparently you do.
Yeah. Something about the dedication thing is like feeling a little weird to me. I wouldn't even have thought about the venonness thing except making a connection between Theophany and like Dunne, like the effigy of her, etc. But then we also know Theophany is venom. And so I'm like shuffling puzzle pieces.
Lorraine is doing a lot of hand waving for those of you who don't want on YouTube.
Anyways, I'm going to keep thinking on it and maybe
you do that.
Here
Let
in
us
a
know.
Couple episodes, guys. I'm going to have another theory to present. So
perfect.
Just stay on alert here.
Wonderful.
So, to move on, we quickly see that Violet is to face Marlise and that it had always been Unnbriel's plan to have 3 pairs of challengers face off. Those little schemers.
Always scheming. Never trust an Umbresh person, okay? Immediately after Violet gets selected, it says, unfair. Golden anger courses down the bond and into my veins, heating my skin. Then Taryn responds, your ire will not aid her. Control yourself. I'm not going to lie. The first time I read this, I was really confused on who was talking and in reference to who and what. It took a couple of rereads for me to realize that at this point, Andarna had once again shown up even though she wasn't supposed to. We talked a lot about this in the last episode. Her presence is going to be super important for later. Also, something to note that Lorraine pointed out in the last episode is that it's been a while since the bond between Andarna and Violet has been described as golden, and I find it interesting that that's now been mentioned twice. So just kind of put a little bookmark on that for later because Andarna's presence is super important for everything that's about to occur.
Andarna is pissed, to say the least, and definitely remember that for later. But I also thought it was notable that Violet describes Marlise as moving like she's used to the weight of heavier armor, and she tucks the short strands of her flaxen hair behind her ears. Flaxen means of the pale yellow color of dressed flax. So again, another word related to something being pale or like less vibrant in color. And I also wonder if this could mean Marlise normally wears the same armor that the silver armored soldiers wear, who I think may be specifically designated for the temple. Which then, if that's the case, is it possible Marlise has been dedicated to Dunne?
I would think everybody in the Isle of Dunne has been dedicated to Dunne. I just assumed all the citizens there have been. I mean, yeah, that's like the primary god they worship. Like maybe as time has progressed, they don't do it as children, but like once you come of age, you can decide. But it's kind of a foregone conclusion if that's where you grew up, that you're going to dedicate yourself. That's kind of what I thought culturally is how it worked. Because they all have silver hair, and it seems like the silver hair is related to the dedication process, which would imply they've all been dedicated.
Well, it's not everybody, though. It's only the blue-robed attendants that have the silver hair.
That's true. Some of the children. Yeah, I don't know.
And
good world-building culture question.
Like temple people specifically seem to have the silver hair, so... Violet steps to the center of the plaza and once again notes that Andarna's anger doesn't dissipate and blends with mine, growing with every step I take. And then everyone agrees to fight with daggers to help Violet out. And I loved that. Both Xaden and Dane agreeing to use Violet's preferred choice of the weapon. That was really nice of them. Violet looks around at the blue-robed attendants again for the silver-haired girl, but she catches the movement from the statue of Dunne and almost swears her eyes flash golden and glance her way for a second. Just once. It would be nice if Andarna would stay where I asked her to. Ah, there she is again. Andarna is present, and even though she wasn't supposed to be, her presence is lining up with how Violet feels a much stronger amount of energy and emotion from Andarna along their bond as well. I loved Violet's confidence and matter-of-fact approach to the situation. She took a page out of Taryn's book when she tells Xaden, don't die before facing Marlise.
What comforting words. I gotta be totally honest. I was really nervous for this scene. I didn't think Violet or Xaden would die, but I feel like we've gone a little too long without a tragedy, and I was very worried for Dane. I was really afraid that we were gonna, seemed unlikely, but I just feel like we've gone too long without someone important dying. And so now I'm starting to get really anxious. I'm like nervous for the next episode or two because I'm like, who's gonna die?
I hope nobody dies. I don't want that to happen.
Well, because, Grady and Aura Binding even died, but we didn't really care about them. So I'm like, name a book where someone important didn't die,
I'm not going to think about that right now because I don't like it.
Perfect.
The challenges begin, and Violet cleverly uses her agility and speed to ultimately outmaneuver Marlies. As Violet and Marlies combat against each other, there were a few details that I wanted to point out. Violet thinks faster. I pour my energy into speed and lunge, finally making contact along the side of her ribs. And then a little later, just before Violet gets Marlies to the ground, and Dunne says down the bond, faster. Atos is already unconscious. And then, of course, once Violet has Marlies pinned, it's noted, light flashes in the sky above us and rain comes down in sheets. As we've been alluding to, none of this feels coincidental. It definitely seems like Dunne is influencing Violet's power, and these weren't even like the most damning pieces of evidence either, so...
Oh yeah, buckle up everybody.
With the blade at her neck, Violet demands Marlies yield, but we can't celebrate yet because Dane is already unconscious on the ground, and Xaden is seconds away from getting his face swiped by Costa's blade. At the sight of this, it's noted that rage devours Violet from the scalp down, streaming through her veins in a surge of heat that sizzles the rain on her skin. Then, in a brilliant move, Violet throws a dagger at Costa, giving Xaden the opportunity to turn the tides. Violet demands Marlies yield once again, and the energy of the whole situation is just getting exponentially greater. The air charges, heat snaps outward, and then lightning streaks downward and strikes to the left and right, cracking the rock.
Moments before the lightning strikes, Violet thinks, and the air charges in a way I'm all too familiar with. We're in danger out here. I feel like when you read that, everything is happening so fast and you're so caught up in the action that you don't realize that embedded in this fight scene is really a line-by-line normal description of what it feels like when Violet wields. We'll talk about this more in a little bit in the conversation with Marlies, but there is no way that was natural lightning. 1,000,000% that was Violet wielding. Now, was she aware she was wielding? Obviously not. Was it intentional? Obviously not. But I'm going to go ahead and say our Dunne theory is no longer a theory. It's just canon for me. There's just too much evidence to support it. Otherwise, the book doesn't make sense if that's not accurate. So for me,
right,
it's not a theory, but we'll obviously discuss it in the conversation that Marlies and Violet have.
So at the sight of the lightning, Marlies yields and the challenge ends. And then this was like the cherry on top to everything. Violet looks up at Dunne and sees her scales rippling with alarming speed in various shades of black. And Dunne tells her, I am angry. And then her head is swiveling in a serpentine manner as her front claws crack the edges of the wall's masonry. Truly, at this point, how can anyone deny that Dunne is not the cause of this? I don't see a different way to explain it. I'm not sure if the thunder and the general storminess is also related, but if it is, could it possibly be a signal that Violet's lightning signet is actually expanding? Because we know lightning is specifically associated with her, but we've also seen a storm kind of going on and charging the air around them. And it's never been described as that, but is it possible that Violet is expanding more into a general storm realm with her signet?
I mean, it's possible. I would have to see a few more examples of the weather changing with her mood. Yeah, I don't know. Because now I'm thinking, can Violet call lightning in any weather? If it's sunny and cloudless, can she still call lightning? I think the answer is yes. I don't think she necessarily needs a storm. So I'm not sure. That's a good question.
It was just a thought. I don't think we have enough evidence to definitively be her signet has expanded to include this. But it's just notable that in addition to lightning, it's really stormy, it's raining, there's other things going on at the same time in this instance. So, okay. Also, With the description of Andarna's head swiveling in a serpentine manner, it immediately called back to chapter 28 when it's noted that Bodhi is reading an early collection of fables from Breivik, and he's looking for tales of dark wielders cured by love or good deeds or dancing naked under a full moon after drinking the venom of a rare snake only found on the farthest isle during a lunar eclipse or something. Snake? Serpentine. What if this is kind of a callback to Andarna's special breed, and we will in fact find that Andarna's kind, lives on this farthest isle, and something about her venom. I don't know. It's a reach. I know it's a reach, and that sounds kind of crazy, but
No, it's just funny. I knew you were going to find a way to work that into this episode. We talked about this
I told
last
you
week.
I would.
We literally had to pause the episode because she was like, oh my God. She was like foaming at the mouth. And I was like, whoa. Why don't we just like sit on that, find a different way to work that in? And I knew she was going to find a way.
Absolutely.
I love you so much. Okay, keep going.
I mean, to continue with that, yeah. Last episode and like in past episodes, we have discussed how the Venin have used poison tip daggers and, the poison being associated with ways to kill Venin. We've been introduced to a couple of different types of poisons, and also Andarna had the scorpion tail with a poisonous barb that she used to kill Solus back in Iron Flame. So what if this is foreshadowing for the fact that a poison from a rare snake, quote unquote, on the farthest isle can actually cure venin and does in fact exist? Never say never. Okay?
Whatever you say. Yes.
Never say never.
Every possible path.
Exactly. Anyways, Kat and Aaric check on Dane while Xaden asks Violet about the lightning situation. Violet doesn't believe she did that since there isn't any magic here, but she does think the snap weird or Dunne. So once again, as soon as Violet questions something, I do have to kind of pause and be like, I mean, maybe it wasn't Andarna. Maybe it did have something to do with Dunne, and there is some sort of power being harnessed there in association with like worshipping the gods or something. But I think overall I'm still leaning toward it being Andarna. But what did you think?
Oh, 100%. It has something to do with Andarna. I think Violet has the mind of a scribe and her brain is just searching for the most logical conclusion. Even though a little goddess intervening seems far-fetched, I think to her it's more realistic than the idea that Andarna is a source of magic herself. I just don't think her brain can reach that far. She's not smart like us, you see. We have incredible brain power, right? So, but I mean, realistically, I think it just is so inconceivable to Violet that that's even a possibility.
I'm surprised that she hasn't
I know. The first time she's like, I know it's all in my head. I'm not really feeling the ripple of power, but like it keeps happening. But I feel like she's got blinders on because she's like, there's no magic here. So how could that be possible? It is impossible, which technically she's correct. There is no magic there unless Andarna is present.
Fortunately, everyone is alive and moderately okay, but soldiers fretting over Marlies reveals that Marlies is actually the Queen of Unnbriel, and Violet just handed her ass.
What a fucking reveal. That was a nice little twist. Did not predict that at all. Super exciting. I really thought like they were going to win. They were going to be marched into this throne room and everything. Boom. Nope. Queen right there.
That really threw me for a loop. I was like, whoa.
I loved it. I loved everything about it.
But I mean, it's kind of cool though, because the queen is participating. Like she stands behind the cultures and the customs and the rules that they have. So
yeah, Halden would never.
Halden would never. No.
Never.
Halden's having somebody else steal treasures on his behalf. So Marlies allows Violet to make her requests, but just as Norel did, Marlies also refers to Violet as an Amarali. And again, why call them Amarali unless perhaps there is a bigger connection between the goddess Amari and the continent?
I agree. Obviously not confirmed. At bare minimum, this does confirm for us that calling people from the continent Amaralis is not just a cultural thing exclusive to Deverelli. It seems like this is a known name across Unnbriel, Deverelli, and likely the rest of the Isle Kingdoms, if I had to guess.
Violet ends up asking her first two questions. So first, she asks about the 7th dragon breed, which Marlies responds, if there were such a thing, this isle hasn't seen fire breathers in centuries. I'm afraid you've come looking in vain. I guess this was the confirmation that they don't know about the 7th dragon breed, but it does seem like they know of fire-breathing creatures. Whether that means dragons or wyverns, unsure, but they knew of them. Second, Violet asked for their help in a war on the continent, though she doesn't specify it's with Venin, which I thought was kind of weird. Marlies refuses, stating that they can't afford their services, but she goes on to ask how Violet cracked the rock, clearly referring to the lightning strikes. Violet is still under the impression that she couldn't have wielded lightning without magic, but Marlies says, and yet you've destroyed something that stood for 700 years before your arrival. Perhaps it is truly Zanal who blesses you. Good luck when you search that particular isle. They have a mean streak. So timeline-wise, this indicates Unnbriel has existed for at least 130-ish years before the history of Navarre began. But I also find it interesting that this isle that strongly believes in Dunne wonders if Zanal has blessed Violet. But I do think that this is foreshadowing for the fact that they're going to go to Zona sometimes, probably sooner rather than later. It seems like the quest squad is going to get the same deal Devrelli offered, but in a twisty turn of events, Marlies declares she'll ally with them if they give them the same thing everyone else in the Isle craves: dragons. So that's crazy, and we'll talk more about the dragons in the next chapter. But first of all, Devrelli has clearly been in contact with Unnbriel.
I thought the same thing. I'd be willing to bet most of the leadership of each of the main isles is in contact with each other. That just seems like good defensive planning, because even though they're not, well, they may be politically aligned, but even though they're not all ruled by the same leader, it just seems like it's them versus the continent. So that doesn't surprise me at all that they've been in contact with each other.
Second, apparently everyone in the Isles wants dragons, and yet they've never been able to get them. So this makes me wonder whether the dragons not being in the Isles is because they decided against it, or if it's because by nature of having no magic, the dragons couldn't settle there. I think this kind of ties back into the conversation of, do dragons bring the magic, or did dragons settle in places that already have magic? It does seem like the Isles know of dragons, but they don't know anything about how they exist, because if they knew about the magic, then they would know dragons can't survive there. Right.
Well, it's not that they can't survive, it's that they don't thrive as well. I mean, we don't really know what the long-term implications are, but when they're on Devrelli and Violet and Xaden have that whole conversation about how the dragons are in pain and they just can't, they're not as strong and thriving as they are on the continent.
But yeah, that ends chapter 32. Moving on to chapter 33, the excerpt. This was from Colonel Kaori's Guide to Dragonkind, and it essentially reiterates much of what we've already kind of picked up on or have been told by the dragons. And that is that dragons are very loyal to dragonkind and will pick their species over a rider always. So we do know that the Empyrean is very secretive and is very selective about what they share with their riders. We also know that the only reason dragons began bonding riders was to protect their species and hatching grounds, since the riders were the ones who could wield signets and powers that could actively combat the Venin. As we've said many times, I am dying to know more about the Empyrean or get just, any kind of dragon lore whatsoever. On the other hand, we have seen how distraught the dragons can get over their riders getting hurt, and we see that there is a pretty deep bond that develops between them. With that being said, we do see that dragons can survive without their riders, but riders can't survive without their dragons. And I mean, I guess overall that seems kind of intentional. Like, humans don't live as long, and the nature of war is that people will die, and they die often. So maybe there was some strategic planning for the bond to be one-sided in favor of dragons. I don't know.
I gotta be honest, I actually don't buy the accuracy of this excerpt. Based on the series so far, everything we've read indicates to me that dragons will risk and sacrifice a lot for their rider. I do think there is a lot of gray area in this excerpt, so I can't definitively say Kaori is totally wrong here, but I feel pretty comfortable saying it's a case-by-case basis. To provide you some examples, Sigale kept Xaden's secret about being an Intensic from literally everyone, the whole Empyrean and her literal mate, which implies some preference of Sigale preferring Xaden over dragonkind, right? Obviously, Xaden's secret doesn't really harm dragonkind, but you kind of see where I'm going with that. Not only that, but Terran has agreed to and aided Violet in all of her risky and sometimes very unnecessary plans, And that to me implies he has a vested interest in her well-being. Sometimes what she's doing could potentially put Dragonkind at risk. For example, when she altered the fucking wards that were the only thing standing between them and the Venom, and Terran went along with it. And that's sort of another indication of him choosing his rider over the good of Dragonkind. Because if he was only interested in saving dragons, he'd be like, yeah, don't you touch those wards, because that's the only thing blocking the Venom from the hatching grounds. That also brings me to my next point, which is something we cannot ignore that directly counters this excerpt is the whole hypothetical. It is possible when a rider dies, a dragon also dies because of the deep, unbreakable nature of the bond. Insert the whole, if Violet dies and Terra can die, then Sigale, blah, blah, blah argument. We've all been talking about that since Fourth Wing. This kind of necessitates that Terran would have a deeper fealty to Violet over his own kind, because if Violet dies, he dies, and so does his mate. And so I feel like just inside of the bond we get between Sigale and Xaden and Terran and Indarna and Violet indicates to me that that is not wholly accurate. And so I'm a little confused why this excerpt is here and what exactly it foreshadows. Honestly, it's a little ominous. It sort of makes me wonder if we're going to have some dragon betrayal in this book, in a future book. I don't know, but it's this sort of oddly placed excerpt and it doesn't make me feel good. And also, I don't think it's entirely true.
I don't know. I guess I have questions too, because, I mean, we know Terran has survived a previous rider dying. They do say in this case with this one that Violet is going to be his last rider, essentially.
Yeah. Well, so if I'm not mistaken, it's been a while since I refreshed on this in Fourth Wing. The older the dragon is, the deeper the bond. And I want to say the more riders, each successive bond is deeper. And so obviously not true for first or second or third bonded dragon who's relatively young, but... Right.
Kind of ominous.
Okay, I already don't know shit.
Well, he's not allowed to know anything, I guess.
Well, true. They don't tell the Empyrean is not forthcoming at all.
Anyways, Queen Marliese is dead serious in asking for dragons, but more specifically, she wants ones that are not fully grown because your kind has let them become too headstrong, too arrogant. Before breaking down the request, Marliese clarifies that she wants 12 eggs, 2 of each breed, in exchange for her army. And I found that to be interesting because she asked for 6 breeds, not 7. And if you find out that there's actually a 7th breed of dragon, wouldn't you want to ask for that too?
Well, I wondered about that, but I just assumed since they are asking her about them, she probably knows they don't have any to give. So, why even ask? So then I went back and did a little more rereading, and I also realized Marliese doesn't even believe that there is a 7th breed of dragon. When Violet asked her, she says, if there were such a thing, this isle hasn't seen fire breathers in centuries. And so I think it's just one of those, concretely she knows there are 6 breeds of dragons, and so why not ask for what you know is in the realm of possibilities?
Okay. In this moment, Violet realizes that Feathertails were part of the deal made in the second Crowland Uprising, but it was because Feathertails were believed to be malleable rather than it being about their gifts. First of all, wow. So is Violet's realization implying that Deborelli had brokered a deal between Krovla and Unnbriel during the second Crowland Uprising?
Damn. I am so mad at myself. This seems like such an obvious thought. But to be honest, Deborelli is in the past, and everything that happened there immediately left my mind. When we left Deborelli, mentally I did too.
I'm still thinking about these things. Because we never get answers, okay? Oh,
so
they
of course,
plague me.
You poor baby. I wish I could give you a hug. So, of course, we don't get confirmation of what Isle Deborelli brokered a deal for, but Unnbriel seems like a very likely candidate. They're people of war, people of battle, so they'd be perfect candidates for soldiers in an uprising. And Marliese didn't even hesitate in asking Violet for dragons.
Yeah.
So it kind of seems like this is something they've wanted for a while. So obviously we don't get confirmation, but in my mind, that's canon. It was Unnbriel that Deborelli brokered the deal for. And to your point earlier, it seems like Unnbriel and Deborelli are in communication.
Yeah.
And then I'm just thinking this real time also. Add to that, when Marliese first starts talking to Violet, she says something to the effect of, I think I'll prefer Deborelli's style and let's make a deal or something like that. So it's clear that there is some connection to those two.
Yeah, she knew what kind of deal they made with Deborelli, and she's like, we'll just do that.
So all of those things kind of point that it seems highly likely it was Unnbriel. And Unnbriel definitely seems like the fuck around and find out kind of people, you know?
Oh, yeah,
Like,
definitely.
you think the people at Hedotus, people of wisdom, are going to like cutthroat? No. I mean, I don't know. We haven't been there, right? But I'm just saying.
Right. Dang. See, okay, this would have been the perfect place to just like reveal that. Like if this is the case,
why not?
Why not do it now? Why do we have to keep guessing about this? Ugh.
You can
Unless
see
I'm
Lorraine.
wrong.
Well, then, yeah, that would be, yeah. You can see Lorraine and I have hit a little wall of frustration this episode. We need more damn answers.
Yeah. And then, of course, you have to ask, what does Unnbriel actually want dragons for? Also, how would they know feathertails are easier to influence than full-grown dragons if they've never had dragons on their isle?
Well, it doesn't explicitly say they've never had dragons. Marlise actually says this isle hasn't seen fire breathers in centuries. That implies to me at one point in their history, they did have dragons. So maybe it's from their recorded history and personal accounts. That's how she knows about dragons.
Okay.
Because she didn't say never. She said centuries.
True. See, I think I read that one a little bit differently. See, this is why I'm getting confused about, like, did they have dragons or not? Do they know about them or not? Because there's all these conflicting statements all the time that make you question. Because, like, I read that statement as in, not that dragons were necessarily there, as in, like, they lived there and thrived there, but more as just that, like, they've had dragons come to Unnbriel at some point, is how I read that line. And so,
that's possible.
But, like, I mean, depending on how you interpret it, then that changes whatever you think next. You know what I mean? And so, like, that's why, like, I'm just getting confused. Okay. Yeah.
Well, fuck.
To move on.
We're almost done, baby, okay? Then you can give that brain a little break. Go watch some White Lotus.
The dragons are obviously not a fan of this idea, and Violet informs them that dragons choose the riders, not the other way around. Marlise boldly reaches her hand towards a growling Sigale, which is absolutely crazy. But I also found it interesting that when Xaden says out loud to Sigale, her death would be incredibly inconvenient. Can you pick a guard or something? Violet notes that he says this with absolute lack of emotion. I kind of feel like this is indicative of Xaden's venonness kind of showing or like popping out, and relates back to the excerpt about the study on venom, where they discovered that, you know, after 24 hours, an ASIM could no longer hide their symptoms. I don't think he's an ASIM yet, but I do think, as we've kind of discussed, he's approaching some kind of limit, or, you know, his venonness is growing.
You know, I went back and forth on this one. On the one hand, it totally seems like something Vaden would say. But on the other hand, Xaden is notorious for his mask of cool indifference, and it sort of feels like he's playing a part here. He's kind of arrogant, haughty, like, we don't need you, you need us. I don't know. It felt like a very normal Xaden thing to do in a public setting. So I split on that.
Interesting. I don't know if I feel that way, because I feel like this one was kind of demeaning to Sigale, and I don't know that writers have ever really, like, even publicly been. Violet certainly has never been demeaning about Tairn. You know, instead they're kind of like, I wouldn't do that. Like, don't mess with
No,
that kind of
they don't like that.
Right, but he's kind of being like,
but see, I took it more
reads a little nonchalant to me.
I took it more as like he and Sigale on the same side, and he's like, if you eat her if you must, but it would be very inconvenient. I don't know. I just when you read it with that inflection.
True. Yeah.
I'm leaning more Xaden than Vaden. You know what I'm saying?
I'm leaning more Vaden than Xaden. We're flipping on this one, but okay. Anyways, ultimately, Violet refuses to trade in dragons, and Marlise's response also piqued my interest. She says, hold on to that indignation, but do visit again when you feel more desperate. From what I know of them, they're rather dedicated to protecting their own, and perhaps a dozen eggs aren't such a bad price for saving the rest of them. This causes Violet to reflect on the words dedicated and look back at the temple to see that the Blue Road attendants are now gone. I almost wondered if there's maybe a little bit of double meaning to what dedicated means for dragons. Like, the priestess's earlier words to Violet indicate that they know dragons possess power and view the dragons as separate, almost like as gods that people on the continent choose to worship over traditional gods. Is that making sense, what I'm saying?
Sort of.
I guess maybe what I'm saying is that maybe there is a little bit of blessing from separate gods going on with the dragons, or do dragons have a separate connection to the gods? I don't know. Maybe I don't really know what I'm saying with that, but
We'll
on for
circle
now.
back on that.
Yeah. As a side thought, it does make me wonder, is it possible that feathertails are unique to Andarna's breed? Like, have we just been fooled into believing that all dragon breeds have feathertails and that feathertails are baby dragons?
So that feels like an easy and tough question simultaneously. My gut instinct is to say, no, of course, because otherwise Terrence, Gale, or Andarna would have mentioned that. But when you think about it, they never, and I mean never, volunteer any information about basically anything. Anything that has been revealed about the Empyrean is a conclusion that Violet draws independently and they just confirm or deny, which, as I'm thinking about it, makes me pretty fucking heated because Violet and all the writers are doing a fuck ton. God, I'm getting angry just thinking about it again. They're doing a fuck ton of work that could easily cause her death to save the fucking dragons. And I feel like they should be volunteering any relevant info. I go back and forth when I think about Iron Flame and I'm like, should Andarna have told Violet that she was a special 7th rated dragon and that she was the key to the Wardstone? Yeah, she fucking should have, right? But then I'm kind of like, well, if you didn't figure it out, you weren't worthy. But then what? What are you going to do if Violet never figures it out? You know, I'm starting to feel this sort of like tension with the dragons where like, I don't want to say I don't trust them, but I don't know. I'm angry and I'm annoyed at the dragons. And so, you know what? Maybe if only Andarna's breed of feathertails, we wouldn't know because we can't freaking rely on Andarna, Terrence, Gale, any of them to be forthcoming about anything. So...
True. Big sigh. I know. No, I mean, I agree. Like, I would love to know, but
I'm gonna need a sweet treat after this.
I just find it interesting again that obviously they know enough to have decided that they want feathertails as dragons, but not enough to like piece other things together about the nature of how dragons bond and how they can thrive or survive in places and stuff. And so I don't know. It's all kind of convoluted. The meeting with Marlise is over and they depart back to the meadow to meet with the rest of the squad. I found it very interesting that Mira immediately asked Violet if she wielded. And I think Mira is starting to catch on to something for sure, even if Violet doesn't think she could have wielded, because Mira points to the fact that Violet is the only one who can still communicate with her dragons. This really only further fuels the Andarna theory, but...
Oh, it totally fuels it. But I took it more as Mira's concern that Violet may have turned venom, and that's how she was able to wield lightning. And that's why she's like, did you wield? Did you wield? Because she's afraid that Violet like took a little power from the ground and was able to do that.
Oh.
Because she even says, Cat filled me in, or maybe Aaric, one of them filled her in. So given like the peril that they were all in, it would be easy to see how Violet in a moment of desperation was like, I will draw power so that I can save us all. And so I think that's why Mira is so like concerned.
But if that's the case, then now I'm confused because does that mean Unnbriel does have magic in the ground?
No. And that's why Violet says, there's no magic here. Why do I have to keep reminding everyone of that? Can you wield? And Mira's like, well, no. I think it's just this paranoia. Because, I mean, it's not really ever super described if Violet's lightning is super distinct or different from normal lightning. But I would imagine there's probably an element of you can tell like a super powerful strike of magical lightning versus, you know, just regular old lightning. And I think Mira just, even though her logical brain knows that's hypothetically not possible, it still doesn't override her ability to worry about it.
Okay. I don't know. Violet is clearly still perplexed by the silver-haired attendants, and she asks Mira when her hair turned silver, to which Mira responds, turn. It grew in that way. I kind of had a whole spiel about this earlier, but I really do think something about the dedication process is related to Violet's silver hair, especially because Violet thinks to herself, of course my parents didn't dedicate me. That practice was outlawed in the 200s and even earlier in Bromiel. So the main question from that thought, why did her parents dedicate Violet to the gods or like start the process?
Yes. And what benefit did they get from that? Right? Like, why Violet? Why not Mira? Why not Brennan? Not only that, but why didn't they finish the dedication process? Those are my two big questions. I mean, really just who, what, where, when, why, how. You know?
Right. That's what makes me feel like there's something sketchy going on with dedication. I have some suspicions about this practice, but
Fair.
Also, as soon as they said it was outlawed in Paromial as well, it immediately made me think of your comment about how something felt odd about the flyers going to temple and like the whole conversation in Shantara when Marin had said our offerings were received, like back in chapter 16. All of this is just getting weirder and weirder. So I'm making an assumption here. I kind of pose this idea that like perhaps the dedication process does somehow end up granting you some kind of power or access or whatever. If that kind of ends up being the case, then it seems like at some point, once people could access magic through dragons or griffins, they then drifted away from worshiping the gods to the same extent that they once did. I don't know. That's unconfirmed, but it was just kind of like where my brain was going. And then we touched a little bit earlier how there seems to be a developing pattern of gods and goddesses having deeper ties or connections to specific provinces. I wondered if part of the unification process within Navarre and perhaps within Paromial, whenever it happened for them as well, involved giving up a more traditional approach to worshiping gods. The group gets packed up and patched up as much as they can thanks to Traeger, and then they depart for the next isle, Hedotus. After a 13-hour flight, the quest squad lands on the coast of Vidiris, the capital city of Hedotus. And notably, the vegetation is even paler than it was in Unnbriel and Everelli, and Terran offers that perhaps magic weakens the farther from the continent one gets. Well, and Dunne states she does not like this place. I really want to know why the continent has magic while everywhere else so far does not. I am just like ready to get the answer on this topic now. I don't think it's related to distance though, because as we saw in Anka, the dragons, have to be directly over magical land to channel for magic. And from what we determined, there is not like an averaging of magic across an area. You have to be right over it to access it. All that to say, I just feel like there's a different reason that the land is paler in color.
I definitely agree. I think it's notable that keeps getting noted. This conversation here was very evocative of the excerpt from chapter 32, where Asher Daxon was talking about the coloring of the vegetation and the colors on the continent versus the isle. I still stand by my analysis earlier. I can't piece it together yet, but there is something to the hues and intensity of colors, both on the continent and off.
Violet also takes note of another plant with 9-pointed leaves called Tarsilla, though she does not make a poison note about this plant.
I was waiting for that. I was waiting for her to be like, like
it's poisonous.
if you stew it in some hot water for a tea, it'll make you vomit. I was waiting for that totally.
Right. Even though Andorna suggests they leave, Violet states where better to find a cure for Xaden than on the Isle of Wisdom.
So I actually thought this was kind of ridiculous that they land and 2 minutes later, and Darna's like, we should leave. When Violet was literally terrified for Xaden and Dane's life and was like, maybe this isn't such a good idea, she was like, every possible path, even though they were pretty sure that dragons weren't there. So she was totally fine risking Xaden and Dane's life and even Violet's, but now she doesn't like the vibe here and she wants to leave without exploring or asking at all, especially given that this is the Isle of Wisdom, so like highly possible that they have some extra knowledge or research available. I don't know. That just kind of annoyed me. You know what? I think it's just clear that dragons are getting on my nerves right now, actually. Like, as I'm saying, I'm like, a lot of my notes are just annoyance at dragons. I'm disappointed in them.
In addition to the fact that the city was constructed very uniformly, I also thought it was interesting that Xaden notes it's a coastal city with no port. I don't know why that's important, but the fact that they find it weird makes me feel weird too.
It's weird, right? Like, why? At first I was like, maybe it's like a defense thing so no one ever has to come onto the Isle. But they're not really a warmongering society. They're pretty peaceful. I don't know. I thought it was weird too.
The squad starts discussing the Hedotus rule of needing to prove wisdom to meet with the triumvirate and checking on their injuries. I looked up triumvirate, and it simply means a group of 3 powerful or notable people or things existing in relation to each other. So basically, it's kind of similar to how the name of the noble leaders in Navarre is called the Cenarium, because there are 6 of them.
Yeah, very good.
Very creative naming styles here.
I love the conversation happening here. Kat starts muttering, I can't believe they elect people for high leadership. Town councils? Sure, but how can they confirm someone has the skills to lead if they're not trained from birth? And then the best possible response from Aaric, being trained from birth doesn't make you any more qualified. And I'm like, looking at you, Halden. And the whole conversation was just really funny to me because Lauren and I both live in the United States where we elect our political leaders. And so it's just funny that it's basically repulsive to Kat that they elect their leaders instead of just having a bloodline. Whereas for me, it would be so odd that one family ended up the rulers hundreds of years ago and the bloodline just keeps ruling indefinitely. That's so crazy to me. I'm like, yeah, but like, how do you know they're okay and sane and well and qualified? You know, shouldn't we pick different people? And so I just think it's funny. I mean, it makes sense for Kat, right? In her world, you're literally trained from it since birth. Whereas for us, you know, the way our political system works, we get to pick our leaders.
Right. I did giggle when Violet takes note of a bruise on the side of Traeger's neck while he checks her cuts because I think it's cute. Traeger and Kat's relationship is developing.
Okay, we don't know for sure it's from Kat, but it's heavily implied.
I assumed.
Violet notes that Kat is like tracking Traeger and Dart is like, nope, not just you. So, yes. I like the Sloan and Dane, Kat and Traeger, Mira and Drake, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Yes, I'm loving it. Out with the old Zayden and Violet, meh. In with the new.
Yeah, new relationship.
I also wanted to note that Traeger mentions that Zayden's arm looks infected, and I pointed this out because in the ever-growing conversation of what can actually kill a Venom outside of alloy and lightning, at this point, could an infection kill Zayden? If you're further progressed, like an ASUM or Sage, are you immune to infections? I don't think Zayden's like going to get super ill and die or anything, but I'm like, should we even worry that he has an infection? Who cares? He's a Venom.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll have to think about that later.
Yeah.
Speaking of other romances, Drake and Mira are also arguing about the effectiveness of a pulse and flight formation during battle. And their whole, like, we argue and dislike each other, but we're still bantering dynamic definitely makes me, as Taryn would say, raise my non-existent eyebrows.
Yup. Oh, they totally give like the mean flirt energy. 1 minute they're arguing about pulse maneuvers and they're in each other's faces and then they're kissing. And that is the vibe they give. And I'm here for it. Sort of a little bit enemies to lovers. Not, I mean, kind of. They were sort of, you know, flyers versus riders. So I'll take it.
Right.
Yes, sign me up.
Eventually, they are approached by a group of people dressed in tunics and gowns of pastel colors. In particular, I honed in on the middle-aged man who has 2 strips of silver amid red curls, and his cane has a sparkling red gem on top of it. And I was like, gem watch? More specifically, is this a ruby?
I think it is. But I mean, we don't know. But yeah, I think it is.
The man introduces himself as Ferris, the second of the triumvirate. And Violet takes note of his eyes that are so blue they're actually purple. There's something up with eye colors because Ferris also comments on Violet's eye color by saying, you have very unusual eyes, not entirely blue or green or gold, but an amalgamation of all. Maybe we somehow are onto something with eye color theory. I don't know. But
I mean, they do talk about Halden's green-ass eyes all the time.
Ferris's reply that his eye color is quite common on Hedotus kind of makes me wonder if perhaps eye colors have roots in different parts of the continent. Also, amalgamation is a term that is definitely popping up more often. It's been used to describe, you know, how alloy is made, and now it's used to describe eye color. I don't know what it means, but it just sticks out for some reason. Ferris offers to let them stay at his home and then introduces his wife, Talia, who, upon seeing Zayden, flares her eyes in palpable shock. And all of our eyebrows became non-existent because they have receded so far into our hairlines. Because Talia is Zayden's mother. Wow! I was not expecting that whatsoever, but I got a little excited because I was like, are we finally going to get some answers about her?
Oh, yeah. You can say that again. Crazy. My jaw was on the floor. I was honestly not expecting to meet her this early or really even in this book potentially at all. We had just talked about her in the last episode. Obviously, we have no details yet, but I think it's fair to say she is in fact not a Venom, and it seems highly unlikely she is in link with them. And so if you didn't already have reason to tune in next week, you sure do now, because we are going to dive deep into Zayden's relationship with his mother. So if you've always wanted to talk about Zayden's mommy issues, we got you covered.
Yeah, assuming we actually get said answers that we
Oh,
desire.
come
but-
on. I mean, I feel like there has to be some little, conversation, heart to heart, or even a big fight between the two of them. If there's not, I'm going to rage.
But anyways, yeah, definitely come back and listen to us next week as well. And with that being said, so that does conclude our analysis portion, and we can end our assembly meeting. And that just leaves us with our favorite moments to share. So my first line that I quoted, it was from Aaric to Halden. He says, "Good luck getting a griffin to carry your basket again."
I really liked when Dunne is talking shit to Taryn and she says, "Do you ever tire of your own voice?" And Taryn says, "Never." Same. I also never tire of my own voice.
To continue on the Halden's annoying train, I also liked it when Violet tells him, "You're banned from Deverelli and have the temper of a 2-year-old on a good day."
I overall really enjoyed the challenge scene between Violet and Marlies. I just thought it was really intense and also entertaining.
Yeah, that was a really good scene. And then my next favorite one was from Taryn, because, curmudgeon-y Taryn, and he says, "Watch where you dismount or you'll embarrass us both."
Taryn's all about the image.
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoyed when Mira and Drake were arguing, and Drake looks at Kat and he's like, "Come on, tell Mira she's wrong, be on my side." And Kat's like, "I'm not telling Mira shit."
Right,
like,
right.
You got me fucked up if you think I'm going to say anything to her. Absolutely not. Have you seen her right hook? Ain't going to be me.
Right. And my last one was from Xaden, and, just his confidence, of course. And before he gets out to battle, he says Garrick is going to be pissed he missed this. Be right back.
In hindsight, it was a huge disadvantage that Garrick was not there because he's probably the second best fighter because he spars with Xaden all the time. They're probably pretty equally matched.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, hindsight's 2020. Last but not least for me, overall, I am just really enjoying all the sparks of potential romances between Dane and Sloane, Drake and Mira, Kat and Traeger. I'm here for it. I'm loving it. I want more love. Everyone love everybody. Want more love.
Side quests.
Yeah,
love side quests. All right. Well, that now concludes our episode. So thank you all for joining us for another episode of the Booked on Fancy podcast. As always, we're so glad you found us. So please leave us a review, subscribe to the podcast, and follow us on Instagram or YouTube to keep up with us on a daily basis. That's all we've got for you guys today.
So stay violent.
And we'll catch you all next week. Bye.
Bye. And stay tuned for some bloopers. I know. I hear your voice.
Every time.
That's the soundtrack for this entire book for me.
Literally.
She sliced the bald across Violet's arm. Oh, blade. Okay.
The bald.
That did not. I was like, I don't even know what I was trying to write there. Prepared to face Marlies. And a swoon-worthy chivalrous. Wow. Okay. And a swoon-worthy God damn it. Chivalrous. Yes. Okay, I can do this.
As I just pointed out.
Oh, you cut out for a second.
Like
I heard you say however, and then it blanked out.
Oh, that wasn't a cutout. That was me just pausing because I was like processing.
Oh, sorry. It's like, it looked like, it actually looked like you froze for a second. Okay. Normally I can tell, but you didn't have your thinking face on. Sorry. You're like, bitch, I'm just thinking, okay?